Today we have the good fortune of interviewing Father Malachi Martin in his home in New York. And Father Martin has written many books, his most recent being The Keys of This Blood. And we will be discussing the many conflicts raging throughout the world. We should begin by asking, why are so many conflicts occurring? We see wars and conflicts raging in the Middle East, in Ireland, in Central America, in Central Europe, and in many places where you wouldn't expect it. We had even an armed confrontation in Canada last year. What's going on here, do you think?
Well, Bernard, I think it's very simple to say what's going on, but it's a bit difficult to grasp it immediately. Briefly, it's this. If you take a survey of the world, say take a survey of North America, Canada, the United States, and Latin America, and then of Western Europe, and of Africa and the Middle East, and the Far East, you'll find one central issue always coming out. Everywhere, Christianity is in recess. Everywhere, the idea of God's rule, of God's law, as promulgated by Christ and as maintained in the tradition of the Christian church, is in recess. And what God is saying to us, really, by these events, is briefly this: look, as a community of nations, you are bloodstained with guilt. You're bloodstained with guilt on account of your anti-life stance. You're bloodstained with guilt on account of your greed. You have deserted my altars, and therefore I'm leaving you to your own devices. And death is going to take over as long as you pursue this course. In other words, it's really an extension of what Our Lady said at Fatima, into which we will go later on in this conversation. At least I would like to touch on it. That what is happening is that God is allowing the greed and the avarice and the cruelty of man to run its course, since man as a community of nations are deserting him. That's, I think, the basic reason why. And now added to that, which we must touch on too, but I'd love to talk about, is the fact that most Catholics in the world today are confused. They're deeply confused about what is right, what is wrong. Is there a just war going on in the Gulf? Is it right for us to deal with the guerrillas in Latin America the way we're doing? What should we do about South Africa, which is shortly going to become a different nation, and the conflicts in Southeast Asia? What are we to do about it all? Where's the directive? There's no clear clarion voice speaking to Catholics. So that is the difficulty. But the overall picture, I think, is explained by the fact that everywhere you can turn, name one country where you wouldn't find that Christianity and Catholicism is in recess. Recess in its faith, recess in its influence, recess in its way of life. And therefore God, you know, when a man drinks too much, Bernard, he doesn't send an angel to punish him. He lets him drink too much, and he ruins his organism. And if he takes drugs, we can take drugs for our diseases and etc. But if you exaggerate with drugs, you're going to kill yourself. God doesn't send an angel to say, hey, stop taking drugs. No, no, no. He allows the sanction of nature to work. There's a sanction of human nature in the community of nations working here. And I guess, as one Pope Pius X once said, what will happen, he said, is the men will be fighting and starting conflagrations between nations, and then brush fires will start out behind them. They'll start to put that out. No sooner will they have that one out than another one starts, and then a fourth and a fifth and a sixth, and finally the remnant will raise their hands to heaven and say, God, we need you. We need your help. And
so man is relying on himself, and it just isn't working.
It can't work. It can't work, because God took over the world with the birth of a baby called Jesus. And that man's rule, the rule of God, through the God-man Jesus Christ, has been rejected concretely by the nations as a whole. They do not act for his sake. They do not act according to his law. They're not extending his rule, and therefore he is leaving them to their own devices. And therefore that's where we are today as regards explaining what is happening today around us. It's a bad time from that point of view.
Now, the conflict then that you seem to be setting up is that of the rule of God versus the rule of man.
Yes, you see, Bernard, there's a great myopia, blindness about this. It's not sufficient in God's eyes that individual members of a nation worship God. And say in America or Canada, I am sure that a good majority believe in God and worship him in their hearts. That's not enough. That's not enough. Christ has a social kingdom and a political kingdom. His law must govern the parliaments, and they must govern the sociological developments. They don't any longer. We're introducing paganism throughout all our governments in the West, and that's being translated into governments in Africa because they're imitating us. And therefore the rule of Christ is not any longer honored in human organization. And he's leaving those organizations to their own destruction. He has always done that, and he's doing it now.
And what have the popes said about the rule of God in the social order?
The popes have insisted, especially at the beginning of this century. You see, Bernard, their remarks and their teaching about the community of nations started to come to the fore when nations started getting together. And it's only in the 1900s and in our century, which is the last century of this millennium, that they found themselves confronted with a real society of nations being bound more and more closely together, usually because they were trying to kill each other, and they had to make a new agreement after World War I, and then after World War II, after having killed off, 70 million more human beings, they had another agreement in the United Nations, and that fell to pieces in the Cold War. So now there's a new community of nations gathered around the United Nations Security Council, and the new commercial and political unity of all nations together. And now the popes have come into a full-blown teaching about what they should do. And the primary thing laid down is that all nations, and above all the community of nations, must acknowledge Christ. Otherwise it can't work. It can't work. And we will stagger from brush fire to brush fire, conflagration to conflagration, until finally men find out they can't do it by themselves. And they may then turn to God. Our Lady's promise was that she would appear at a certain moment and save them from self-destruction. And that will be the beginning of a turnaround, the end game, as it were. We are in the end game now of nations.
And why has man in this century seemed to have abandoned God and seemed to more and more try to put the emphasis on solving his problems by himself?
Well, that started way back a couple of hundred years ago, Bernard, because you see, there has always been, and above all from the 16th and 17th century onwards, that's 4 centuries ago, a group of men arose who said religion is nonsense. This idea of God in heaven, pie in the sky when you die, as they said derisively, and of hell beneath with the devil there waiting for you if you commit sins and die in sins. This is all superstition, hocus pocus. Man can do anything. The sky is made of steel and the earth is made of bronze. We have only got our bodies and our organisms and our minds, which are material anyway. We can build a perfect paradise here if we get rid of hocus pocus, if we get rid of religion, which has hampered man from achieving his destiny. Now that has grown into a faith and a credo, a real religion on the part of millions who live as if God didn't exist. You see, it's not enough for you to say, I believe in God, and then do nothing about it. If you believe in God and in Christ, he must therefore have that must have some effect in your daily life. And in your daily life and the daily life of your community and your city and your state and your federal government. Otherwise it's a sham. Now, that is not taking place at the present moment. Now, into that comes something else, which is very, very particular to us Roman Catholics, and it's this. We know that since the creation of the world, there has been in contention with Christ, the cosmic king, the king of the cosmos, and the creator, there has been in contention another entity whom we called Lucifer, and we call Satan. Everything we know from the saints, and from the popes, by the way, from the 19th and 20th century on, tells us that our particular century is the crisis time in that 2,000-year-old battle between Christ and Satan. And if we are to be quite frank about it, we must say that the huge increase in sin, public sin, legislated sin, say in abortion or euthanasia, and in the spread of pornography, and in the anti-life stance for euthanasia, etc. All that we must put down to an intense activity on the part of Satan, because according to everything we know from Revelations and from what the popes have said and saints have said, these are his last days of triumph amongst the nations of men, before Our Lady and our Lord come, and our Lord slays him with the word of his mouth, and Our Lady stops him in mid-track, because she is all-powerful under her Son. So we're witnessing, I think, the slope up to the crisis point of the big battle between Lucifer and Mary the Virgin, the Mother of God.
And all these conflicts that are going on throughout the world are part of this cosmic battle between Lucifer and Christ.
That's right. And you see, do you remember the policy of scorched earth that Hitler had when he had to leave France or Belgium or Holland or Germany itself, drawing back into his little bunker in Berlin? He burnt everything, destroyed everything, killed everything, as Saddam Hussein did in Kuwait. Well, you can refer to the present activity of the devil as scorched earth. He knows the end is on him. He knows that what he can take now is all he can take, like those Iraqis fleeing out of Kuwait City with trucks full of loot and booty, only to be caught, by the way, by the American forces, and most of them didn't get away with it. But the devil is trying to make away with as many souls as he can before the time comes when he knows it's over, his reign is finished, and the world will return to the worship of Christ and of God. So that's where we are. Now, this, of course, is impenetrable for the non-Christian mind. And for many Catholic minds, they don't even think about this. Because the belief in the devil, and by the way, you must believe in the devil, otherwise you're not a Catholic. Belief in the devil is something that has disappeared. Many bishops don't believe in the devil. Many priests and nuns don't believe in the devil. They laugh at it. They teach the very opposite. There are catechisms in this country, the United States, and I'm sure in Canada, which say that this was once upon a time an idea we had, but that now we know that there's no such thing, that the devil is a creation of our minds, and that all we have are sinful structures created by, say, the Yankee imperialism or gross capitalism. But the idea of a devil, a being going around tempting you and causing you to sin, and to whom you say, yes, I shall offend God, I shall break his law, this we don't admit any longer. In fact, somebody has said it's the best PR job ever done, because he doesn't exist. And what spy would not be happy to be known not to exist and to continue his work undercover? And that is what is being done. That is what is happening to us. So I think that's the root of the crisis. Now, it won't do to go to the Canadian House of Parliament and say, you've got to listen to this fact, that the devil is working among you. They would laugh at you. And similar to the US Congress, or to the British House of Parliament, or the French Chambre des Députés, or any government today in the West, so-called enlightened, they wouldn't even say what the Athenians said to Paul. We'll talk about this some other day. They'd say, we will never talk with you about this. Don't invite that man back again. So you see, it's unbelief, which ties again into Our Lady's cry about unbelief, undoing the world, at Fatima, when she said that to Lucia in one of her revelations. So that's the situation where it is, and that's the root of it all. Now, we must add in that there are men and women dedicated to spreading the reign of Lucifer all over the world, especially in the United States. Do you know, Bernard, that in this year, 1991, there were 8,000 covens, satanic covens, in the United States alone. 8,000. And they're not simply ignorant men. They're brokers, lawyers, doctors, architects, priests, bishops, some cardinals, nuns, and their formal worship is to worship Satan as the prince of this world. So it has gone very far. The reign of Satan is upon us, and the anguish that many Catholics feel, and the anguish many priests feel, and many bishops feel, good priests and good bishops and good people, is due to the fact they know the battle is, for the moment, doing terrible devastation to them, and that there's no hope, there's no upturn in our misery for the moment. It's simply black, arid desert.
Let's take a look at the geopolitical situation and this area of the social order, and start with the Middle East.
Well, the Middle East is a very particular case because now our interest is focused there upon it. And on the face of it, it looks like this. There was a man called Saddam Hussein al-Tikriti, dictator of Baghdad for nearly 20 years now, a murderer and an assassin. By the way, his earliest job was as an assassin, a hired assassin. This man is, he's not immoral, he's amoral. He is guilty of heinous personal crimes, and then of creating a system over there which rivals that of Hitler, complete with his Gestapo. He called it the Mohabharata, 125,000 employees, employed solely to spy on the Iraqis and to cut out dissenters, kill them, assassinate them, tell the families they were assassinating them, to spy out everything. This man invaded Kuwait, raped it, robbed it, stripped it, killed its citizens, and then insisted that it was always a part of Iraq, which was a lie, by the way. Kuwait was always independent. It was never part of the Ottoman Empire. It has been independent since 1756. But you see, Saddam is like his father, Satan, whom Christ described as the great liar and the great murderer. He is satanic in his behavior, whether he's a Satanist formally or something else. Now, Kuwait is a very great ally and friend of Britain. Most of the money in the British Treasury is Kuwaiti money. They depend on it. We depend on Kuwaiti oil and on Saudi Arabian oil, and there was no doubt about this. Saddam was going for Saudi. So we rushed over with an expeditionary force. We reinforced that over 4 or 5 months. We then made that into an offensive force by November, and by January 15, with the 10 or 12 votes in the Security Council, we went to war. And in 100 hours, we routed his arms and his armies. Now, why this? Well, on the face of it, people would say, well, Saddam Hussein was greedy, we had to stop him. That cannot be quite exact, because the Chinese were very, very greedy about Tibet, to the point that they killed off 1 million Tibetans and drove 1.2 million into exile. We remained very great friends with Tibet. We didn't object. And Mr. Gorbachev has refused to let go of the Baltics. He has killed members of the Baltic states. We haven't really objected. We've done nothing about it whatever. We have sort of saying this is not kosher, this is not decent and nice, but that's far from sending an expeditionary force. That's far even from sending a representative over there to say to the Lithuanians and the Estonians and Latvians, we're with you, or for making a strong process with Mr. Gorbachev. Why? Well, we're friends with Mr. Gorbachev, and we're friends with the Chinese. And nobody ever stood up when Russia invaded Afghanistan and said, get out or else. No, no. Because our vital interests, as we were told, were not involved there. The Indonesian government has been killing the inhabitants of an island called East Timor, the Timorese, for the last 15 years. It's genocide. We know it. Everybody knows it. Nothing is done about it. Nothing is done about it at all. Mr. Gaddafi of Libya has been oppressing the people in Chad for ever so long with missiles, with gas, with bayonet charges, with bombs, with soldiers. He's killed thousands, tens of thousands. We haven't sent an expeditionary force. No, no, no. We don't act out of moral good. We act out of vital interests. Now,
so we're viewing our interests solely in material terms now.
Yes, but there's an added factor to add into it, and it's this. It's what Mr. Bush has accustomed us to know as the New World Order. We have to deal with this at length, but put it like this. Saddam Hussein cannot fit into the New World Order. No dictator can of that kind. He had to be got rid of, not because he was unjust, not because he looted Kuwaiti, not because he killed off people, not because he imprisoned his own populace, but because he would refuse to fit into the general scheme of the New World Order. That's why we're really there. You see, Bernard, when we talk about the New World Order, you'd have to remember that the architects of the New World Order have only 2 obstacles in their way: Christianity and Islam. Now, Christianity is already molded and honeycombed. It's a weakened structure. It has no political influence, no armies, no parliamentary influence, no cultural influence any longer really in the world, and therefore it is already taken as an institution. Islam is different. Stretching from Algiers to Indonesia, there are 800 million Muslims, and their characteristic up to this has been irredentism. That is, they will not change. They reject us as infidels. They regard us as unclean and sinful. Up to this. That had to be changed if there was going to be a new world order grouping all the society of nations together, especially a group of nations like those in the Middle East who hold oil. And oil is essential for the world at the present moment until scientists come up with a non-oil source of energy, which they will, but at the present moment we depend on that. So I think Saddam Hussein gave the architects of the New World Order the chance to infiltrate Islam. Now, for the first time, the Saudis are permitting a foreign army on their soil, and they're permitting foreign habits as regards women. They don't even carry veils any longer. They can even fight in the armies. This was abhorrent. And you would be killed if you went in certain parts of Saudi Arabia on the spot by any Saudi, and the government would laud him. You'd be killed by the police. It's sacred. We infidels couldn't touch it. That's all changed. So we've started leavening Islam with a view to integrating them into the family of nations.
So there's going to be a liberalization of Islam the same way that there's been a liberalization of the Christian
That's
churches.
right. That's right. To leaven it and make it conform to the ideas of the New World Order.
Let's talk about the New World Order just briefly. What are the key ideas of the New World Order?
The key ideas of the New World Order is this. You see, if you examine what we did after the First World War, we tried to have a balance of power. And it didn't succeed. Hitler and Mussolini and Tojo and the Japanese rose up. So then we had the Second World War. At the end of the Second World War, we said, okay, well, we'll have a balance of power between the Soviet Union and us and keep the peace. It didn't work because of what the Soviet Union was like. Now we have arrived at a very ancient idea, by the way, we're not the first to think of it, that the key to world peace is not a balance of power, but a community of power. And this is the first time we've had a community of power. Listen, if you can imagine people who lived in the 40s and 50s and are now dead, if they knew only that in the fall of 1990, all nations except a few, 98% of nations voted together to have an expedition to put down one aggressor. I mean, that never happened. And 33 nations contributed material and men and money to this. There was a moral consensus that never existed in the world before. This is a community of power. Therefore, that an aggressor will be jumped upon by all nations in concert, systematically, and they will crush him. So it's, Mr. Gorbachev, when he met with President Bush at Helsinki, said it very well. He said, today, no one nation can afford exclusive leadership. Now it's the leadership of the community of power. We're all onto this. It's community of power. And that's why Saddam couldn't last. There was this moral consensus. So the New World Order is built on a community of power and overwhelming power. There always has to be somebody like the United States, which has the economic pull-out power, the military clout, and the mind, a democratic mind, which doesn't go into a country to take it over, but goes into a country to liberate it from undemocratic, as we call it, people who are trying to take it over or run things or do damage to the whole community. So that's the first note of the New World Order. It's going to be based on a community of power, not on American leadership or Russian leadership or European leadership or leadership of any one nation or any one empire, but on the community of nations. Because now we are a family. We're a family. That's number one. Number two, it's based on economic unity. Why that? Well, you see, in 1860, for instance, 1850, in the 1800s, the USA needn't trade with anybody. It could exist by itself. It didn't need anybody. Britain did, by the way, small odd. We didn't. Today, there is no nation, including us, that can't exist without trade. We would sink beneath the waves next week if we didn't trade. We have to have export and import trade to live. But we're not the only ones. Everybody must. You know, there were two nations that resisted the Western capitalism for a long time. One was run by the so-called Robin Hood of the Mediterranean, Fidel Castro, and the other was called Albania, the hermetic crab of the Adriatic Sea, where it is, and they would have nothing to do with us. Now they're screaming for trade. They know they can't exist. No nation can exist without trade. It must trade and be traded with. That means money, that means capitalism, that means amicable relations, diplomatic relations. So everybody has to do that. Now, whether we know it or not, that is now coming to a head in a thing called GATT, the General Agreement of Tariffs and Trade. That is an arrangement which will be concluded by the end of April between 168 leading nations, and therefore taking in all nations, according to which no nation can trade, export or import unless it conforms to the rules laid down by an international committee, which won't be completely exclusively American or European or Russian. It'll be a general transnational committee. And that means that we are locked into a one world economic system. They'll tell you how much to import and how much to export, what not to import, what not to export, and what to charge for it. So we're going to lose our certain economic liberties, and so is everybody. So it's one world economic system. Then there is the brute fact, which most people like you and me can never realize fully. You know, I can't count $1 billion. I can't count even $1 million. I have never had it. I don't want $1 million. But I can't even count $1 billion. It defies my imagination. Yet, on the world markets, the world money markets, every day, say in Singapore or in Tokyo or Rome or Dusseldorf or Paris or New York, there are men mainly men, some women, but very few women, mainly men who play on those markets every day, investing, de-investing, with over 30 or 40 billion dollars. They're very rich men. They're not bad men. No, they're very wealthy. And they're men who have transnational interests. They have timber in Malaysia, and they have rubber in Brazil, and they have gold in the Soviet Union or in South Africa, and they have corn elsewhere, and cars and car parts and electronic equipment. They have interests everywhere. They are transnational men. They're Americans or Chinese or Russians or French or Brazilians, but they have lost all that. They have a passport for one country probably, but they live everywhere because their interests are everywhere. Now they govern the daily flow of capital and capital goods. No nation can exist without that flow of capital, and no nation can exist without the flow of capital goods. They govern that, and they ultimately decide when a recession is going to take place or when a depression is going to take place. They ultimately decide if a government is going to stand, because every week a government must pay its bills, at least if not every day. And that money is capital money. It's funny money. It's not in cash. It's funny money. It's on paper, but it's real wealth. Now they govern all that. And that flow of capital and capital goods means that we are already within the engrenage, the mechanism, as they say, of a one-world financial system. So the New World Order implies, therefore, it implies a one-world economic system based on a one-world financial system run by transnational people who have no particular loyalty to any particular country because all their interests are everywhere. Sure, they were born in Kansas, or they were born in Brazil, or they were born in Hong Kong, but they have risen above that because their interests are national, transnational. Their interests are not national, they're transnational. So those are the three notes of the New World Order. In other words, it's based on a community of power, a consensus, that we will stand together against anybody who disrupts this arrangement of the Society of Nations as an organization. It's based on a one world economic order that's run by a central supranational agency, a government. These are governmental decisions, and that is based ultimately on the sinews of power, money, money. As somebody said in the 17th century, Mayor Rothschild, I don't care what form of government they have, just let me dominate their money. And that is the key to it all. There's one last note to be pointed out about the New World Order. God has no part. It is not the rule of God. It is not based on morality or immorality. It's based on profit. And it's based on the gods that go with it. Greed, preferences, selfishness, mercilessness. You are barefoot, Bernard. I make shoes that cost you $20. You haven't got $20? Sorry, pal, you've got to go barefoot. I produce wheat and baby formula. You have 4 children. You need it. It will cost you about $40 a month. You haven't got $40? Sorry, they'll have to starve. The system is built on profit. It's non-moral. It depends on the capitalist if he has morality. If he hasn't got morality, there is none. The New World Order is not based on anything. Now, there's a very difficult point for a lot of Catholics, especially Americans, but also Canadians and British, to realize here. We're always talking about let the church stay away from politics. No politicking priests. The Pope shouldn't be talking politics. Keep the priest in the sacristy and let him stay in the pulpit, but let him stay out of the political voting booth. There's this idea, the funny idea, that the church is out of place. And what the church has to say is out of place in the secular order. In the public marketplace, no religion, please. Now, God insists that anything a man does, especially in community, especially about the human race, must be dominated by his rule. But it isn't. We know that. And therefore, this New World Order is not the rule of God. And as the present Pope doesn't tire saying, it cannot succeed. It's going to unravel. And by the way, unraveling it is in front of our eyes with the contentions and the wars. Look, last year, once we made peace with Mr. Gorbachev, and the Berlin Wall fell down, and the 5 European nations and the eastern satellite nations of Soviet Union suddenly were free, as we all thought, and Mr. Gorbachev was having capitalist dreams, and we were giving credits and food, and we were to the Russians, to the Soviets, and Mr. Gorbachev became Gorby for everybody in the Western world, Italy, Rome, France, Spain, Belgium, England, America, Canada. The idea that 1 year later, we would have an army of 750,000 fighting in the Middle East. People would have horse laughed if you had proposed it, and yet that's what happened. Now we think we've got rid of Saddam Hussein. Well, we're going to have a difficult time winning the peace, but we're going to do it because we're dominant, because our armies have routed him. But I'd wait for 6 months. There's going to be another brush fire somewhere. And again, we'll rush off to put that one on. Because it can't succeed, because finally it is the gods of greed and avarice and selfishness and domination and just humanism without God that sit on the top days and say, do this, do that, do the other, and behind them, invisible, is the...
Well, the money men are always talking about limiting the population and the size of families.
They are. You see, it's the most amazing statement, Bernard. I'll tell you why. If you look at the countries, the black Sahara countries, you'll find that demographically, their populations are not adequate for tilling the land. They're underpopulated. And yet those African countries are the very ones on which International Planned Parenthood are concentrating to spread the use of contraception, to limit the population more. There is this funny principle, which is really the great death wish. It's a demonic energy on which the world is now running. Limit the population, because if you limit the population, then you have less expenses, and you can dragoon people much more, and you have them under your control. And then you can say, well, we will allow 4 million in Kenya this year, and 3 million there, because economically that doesn't demand much foreign aid, and we can deal with that situation, and we can use it. But more than that, they will have to prosper and make money that we want to make. It's a different thing. And besides that, that also increases the population of people who could oppose the system which we want to use. That's the idea behind it. So the organizers, and then they know that they can't do that unless they start with a child in school. Therefore, they abhor any education that's not theirs, which is a totally secular education, as we're now getting in the United States, and as I think you're getting in Canada too. In the mind of Satan, in the mind of the original source of the idea of the New World Order, because it is satanic in its ultimate inspiration, because it's a world without God. In his mind, this is a way of destroying the presence of the Trinity. If you can totally secularize education, and thus rid the children of any religious interpretation or meaning or sense in their own lives, if you can do that to the family, make divorce very easy, allow homosexual marriages so that marriage between man and a woman is just an alternative, and if you can spread homosexuality, give them rights, civil rights, federal rights, state rights, give them rights in every possible way, then you proceed to destroy the idea of marriage. Now, Bernard, unless there's an institution called marriage, husband and wife, and between them a covenant with God, within which they produce children according to the laws of God, that means the Trinity, as a working unit within the human race, is disappearing. It's not in their hearts, it's not in their lives and their married lives. And therefore, in the ultimate idea of Satan, it is to bring the human race to the point that it is simply a flat, level thing of equals, all equal in their misery, without the Trinity. And that's why the New World Order doesn't want Christian education, and that's why it doesn't want Christian marriage, and why it will foster homosexual way of life as an alternative lifestyle, and why we'll have lesbian parents, and we'll allow sex experimentation and fetal experimentation. Look, can you imagine the pathos of, say, 30 embryos lying in a refrigerator in the Maryland laboratory that does these things? Those are all souls, human souls, imprisoned, alive, and kept there. Think of the joy that gives Satan. Those souls can't be touched by baptism, and they can be destroyed at the twist of a scalpel if they don't succeed in some experimentation. This is the destruction of the human family as Christ originally planned it. And remember, what is the desecration there for us Catholics? I'll tell you very simply. The human family was supposed to reproduce the family of God. God the Father, God the Son, and the love of the Holy Ghost between them, with Our Lady as the mother of the human race they were produced, and the mother of God himself. That's the paradigm, that's the heavenly image according to which on earth the family should be built. And that's what Christianity did. It taught men to rear families, create families, in imitation of that divine thing. And thus the Trinity was perpetuated by grace and by doctrine and by our Lord and Our Lady and the angels and the entire gamut of the Christian revelation. That is being liquidated. And therefore the Trinity is being destroyed. And therefore Satan has his victory over Jesus. He's nullifying Calvary. He's wiping out salvation. And he's producing a list of people who can't go to heaven. Now, the point I'd love to stress, ending this part of it, is this, that in no way, as the present Pope says, in no way can this succeed. It cannot have God's blessing. It's going to lead to further and further and further difficulties. We all thought that everything was going to be fine once Gorbachev became like us and the Soviet Union stopped being against us. It didn't. We're now at war again. Now we're going into a peace. And we won't say, well, now we've dealt with it. Oh, no, we have not. The next brush fire is behind our backs. If the match is already to the tinder, it's going to burst out. And then we'll rush to put out that, saying, well, this will be the end of it all. It won't be. It won't be. It won't be. It's going to unravel again. Because why? God is allowing us to be eaten up by the sanctions built into our race. As Augustine said, we were made for you, O God, and our hearts are restless until they rest in thee.
Now, you had mentioned Gorbachev just recently. What is the role of Russia in all these problems and in all this scenario of increasing conflict?
Well, I'll tell you, if you really want to look at Gorbachev in the light of truth and reality, you have to talk about Our Lady, and you have to talk about Fatima. You can study the geopolitics of Gorbachev and admire his agility, by the way. This man is one of the cleverest geopoliticians we've known of in history. And the continual cry that he's just about to be beheaded, decapitated, or he's got to be ousted, or he'll be killed, or he'll lose power. It's such a joke. Every month he acquires more power. Every year he's more powerful. We even called him a man of peace and gave him the Nobel Peace Prize. And he was on the cover of Time. Oh, this man is marvelous. Again, public relations. Marvelous instinct for a profile among the nations. Now, but if you look at him from the point of view of the Church, the only sure word we have about him is from Our Lady. Now, Our Lady was very clear in Fatima in 1917 on October 13. She was very clear about it all. And in the previous months, talking to the children, she said that the errors of the land, which Gorbachev now dominates, and of which he is the figurehead and the chief agent, the errors of that will spread everywhere unless certain conditions were met. We didn't meet those conditions, by the way. The Pope of 1960, good Pope John the 23rd, was supposed to fulfill those conditions. He didn't, for his own reasons. And therefore, Our Lady said beforehand, she said way back in 1917, if they do not do this, if they don't fulfill my mandate, then certain things will follow. Two things chiefly. Unfaith will reign. The faith will be withdrawn. God will withdraw grace from Christians and from the world. And number two, the world will be punished by catastrophes the world has never seen yet. Now, Mr. Gorbachev is the key in that because he is the most powerful man in Russia, in the Soviet Union. We have to bow our heads, therefore, to a fact that in God's plan, and it's purely arbitrary, but God can do what he likes because he's God, in God's plan, salvation is not going to come from the West on the wings of our bombers and in our marvelous planes and in our marvelous fighting men. There's no salvation there. Salvation is going to come from the East. And it's not going to come because Mr. Gorbachev becomes a Christian and puts a crease in his trousers and adopts capitalism. No, he's not going to do any of those things anyway. It's going to come because she has chosen Russia as the place to operate the first great change, and it will teach the world, not because it's Russia, but because she chose to convert Russia at the last moment before the final crack, which will swallow us all up. And that is the message of Fatima, that Mr. Gorbachev, willy-nilly, this man with the sign of Cain on his forehead, the sign of the murderer, this man is a harbinger of the destiny of Russia in God's choice. Why did God choose that? I don't know. Will I ask God about it? No, you never question somebody who has absolute power. He has chosen that. Why? We don't know. I rather guess it is because, apart from the rulers of Russia, the people are a very humble, believing people. And in the West, we have grown fat with materialism. We're fat cats. We have a way of life the whole world wants. We're comfortable, and our sins are the sins of those who needn't sin at all. We needn't sin. We are so comfortable medically, and scientifically and socially and politically, compared to the rest of the world, that we have the luxury to seek out God in a new way. We haven't. We've just sunk deeper into our sins, our sensuality, our materialism. We've forgotten God to a large extent, as a system, the Western system. So that she has chosen that because that's the way she has decided with God the world is to be saved, and the kingdom of Christ, the rule of God, is to be installed once again amongst men, for a brief period anyway. So that's where Mr. Gorbachev must be understood as that. Otherwise, if you try and reason your way through Mr. Gorbachev, he is inexplicable. Inexplicable. How this man has succeeded, and why he succeeded, and why we foment him, we treat him as a friend. He can do anything. He can kill Georgians, and he can kill Armenians. He can kill people in Baltics, deprive them of their liberty, refuse it, and we still give him the supplies we give him and the credits we give him. We still allow him make missiles which he promised not to make. We allowed him support Saddam Hussein through the war. We didn't do anything about it. We have this funny, there is a reason for the way we collaborate with him, and that's something, another theme which we must speak about, why we do permit Gorbachev to get away with it. But the essence of Mr. Gorbachev, I think, for any intelligent Catholic or Christian today, the intelligent way of understanding him is within the framework of Fatima. Otherwise, it's a jungle. It's a jungle. There's no rational explanation that would satisfy my mind.
Are the communists then acting as a scourge, and it's our sins in the West that gives the communists their power?
That's partly true, Bernard, but it's worse than that. It's worse than that. We are a scourge already. We are a scourge already. We are a real moral scourge for ourselves. We are eviscerating morality from our public life and from our mode of education, from our science, from our sociology. I mean, we just are not Christians any longer in our academia, certainly not in the United States, and I doubt it in Canada. Our parliaments in Canada and the United States are not Christian parliaments any longer. They don't consult Christian morality when it's a question of the Gulf, or a question of the baby formula in third world countries, or the production of a B-2 bomber. Morality has nothing to do with all that. This is business, this is politics. So we are our own scourge. Then there's this fact that it is very hard to explain why the West, anti-communist in its ideology, and anti-communist in its political needs of human liberty and the rights of man, the democratic egalitarianism of the West, why we get on with the Russians. The only explanation is that there's a higher power to which we both give obeisance. There's a wider group of men who make both the Soviet Union and us possible. And they have worked out that between these two superpowers, they can corral the world into a new world economic order. And I fear those men, because they're all powerful. And they finally call the shots. I don't think Mr. Gorbachev can go beyond them. Mr. Khrushchev once made a reference, I forget over what crisis, I think it was the Cuban crisis, but he said, well, it looks as if we're going to have reconciliation and peace with the US, but we must consult the Council of Elders. He was the only one time he said that. And it triggers a whole history, as you know, the idea that there is a universal assembly of wise men, very powerful men, who sit at the back of everything in deep armchairs with their cocktails and decide really who wins and who loses, and offset whatever the Soviet Union might do with what it allows the capitalist world to do, because both are being directed to produce a godless world. Now that's something we can never prove, and if you try to prove it, I think that you wouldn't live very long, but that there is a consortium of men who are both Soviet and American and French, but who are transnational, and who have another idea completely how to use the existing powers, including the superpowers. More than one person is convinced that it's very hard to resist that conclusion. It's very hard to get away from it. It has only two, as I said, they have only two obstacles in their way. One was Islam. One was Christianity. Both are in the process of being liquidated and eviscerated. They'll be used. They can be integrated. It's, of course, because variety is the spice of life. Just as we want to keep folkloric dances in Kansas City or in Kerry Island because they're colorful, but don't let that dominate our parliaments or our politics or our money. So I think that we're on our way to being integrated into a variegated human community which is purely human. And the sky above is made of steel and the land is made of bronze, and that's it.
Does that perhaps describe why there were these changes in Eastern Europe? It was to bring communism into line with the New World Order. And what is essential to Marxism has not really been thrown away.
Oh, no. Marxism is quite safe. In fact, Marxism has spread wider. You know, let me ask you a question about this, Bernard, which our listeners can ask themselves as I ask you. How did, say, Czechoslovakia get free? How did Poland get free? How did Bulgaria get free? Was there a revolution?
There was a revolution.
Where? What arms? Where did they get their arms? Where did they attack the parliament? Did they mob in the streets and demonstrate? Did they wipe out the secret police? Did they suddenly, overnight, a huge army of citizens up like the French Revolution or the other revolution say, out, out, out? Bernard, let me answer you, it never happened. Miloš Jakeš, who was the head of Czechoslovakia, got a telephone call from Gorbachev saying, step down. Erich Honecker of East Germany, the cruelest of them all, got a telephone call saying, Erich, auf Wiedersehen. Mr. Zivkov of Bulgaria got a telephone call too. The only one who resisted was Ceausescu, and the KGB hunted him down and killed him off. The party was told to fade out politically and let things take their course. There was no revolution. The people didn't. They couldn't revolute. They couldn't rebel. There was no way of rebelling. Suddenly the government ceased to be dominated by Moscow because Moscow gave the orders. Similarly with the Baltic states, we now know the KGB teams went in, creating the disruption in the streets, both for Russia and against Russia. This has been a very carefully choreographed charade, all to make the West think that the communist bear has ceased to have claws, and that we can now consort with him, and we can now share our markets with him, and admit him, as we're going to do, into the European Union of Western countries for commerce.
So Marxism really has been modernized, it's not gone.
Oh, no, they're very strong. And Marxism is, the essence of Marxism, what is it? It is this, it's rank materialism as regards money and production. That is rank materialism. That is the essence of Marxism. And the error of Marxism, the basic thing, is that the state runs everything. But I don't know about your Canada very well because I'm not a citizen and I don't study it very much. But I know that we in the United States are coming into a greater and a greater statism, where the state dominates education, and it dominates sexuality, and it dominates medicine, and it dominates literature, it dominates the public media. Our media are not free in any real sense of the word. The state is very powerful, and that is a principle of Marxism. True democracy, democratic egalitarianism, wouldn't tolerate that. That's why I think an American of 1850 who woke up in 1990 would say, hey, our liberties are gone. Well, I'm no longer free. So the essence of Marxism is preserved even and is spread. And if you did a tour, I think, of our academic institutions in the United States, certainly, you'd find the majority on the faculties were Marxists. Pure materialists, think the state is okay so long as it pays them their salaries and supports the cause, crushes these religious people who want to change demographic laws about contraception and abortion and euthanasia. They're all behind that. They're strictly Marxist in outlook, and it's very respectable and very looked upon as fashionable. Now there's a surge of a certain American patriotism, and that's what brings in the ordinary people. But the establishment is thoroughly Marxized already in mind. Thoroughly Marxized. And in the countries that were under communist domination, the Marxist, the communist and the Marxist parties have just changed their names. And they say it openly. The Italian Communist Party has just changed its name and call it the Social Democrats or something, or Democratic Socialism or something. But they're still Marxists, and they're still aiming for the Marxist ideal. But the timetable is long. Mr. Gorbachev knows that he has to have the Soviet Union admitted into the Western Union, Economic Union, and that's the second step. And the third step is that must be integrated with the United States, so that we have one vast market stretching from Vladivostok on the China Sea, across the Russian heartland, across Western Europe, across the Atlantic, all the way to California beaches. One vast human market. In that, then, the Soviet Union knows its materialism and its statism are going to be dominant. They have to be. And That's the victory. Now, Our Lady steps in Fatima and says, it cannot be, because I'm going to step in at the last moment, when the world has been penetrated with the errors of Russia. I'm going to stop it all and turn the wheel back and liberate men from this domination. But you see, that needn't have happened, Bernard, if we had only done what we were told. We didn't do what we were told, and therefore we're paying the price. Because Fatima was either or. Either you do this, or this will happen. We didn't do this, and therefore we are now in the middle of the Fatima or, if I can put it like that.
And Russia is spreading its errors already into the West, because
yes.
we're already part way to having a Marxist system.
Oh yes, we are on our way to it. But it's again, people say, oh no, we have Marxism, because they don't see people in jackboots killing people, and there's no Gestapo working. There's no secret police. The KGB is not sort of under every cellar with a bomb, and no assassinations, and they think therefore that there's no danger. But Marxism is a thing of the mind and the soul. It has exterior trappings, but its real soul and essence are in the mind and in the way you live. And I doubt if there's much difference between the mentality of the normally Marxized academician or doctor or lawyer or broker or artist today in the United States and those in the Soviet Union who are thoroughgoing ideological Marxists.
Because they have both rejected the rule of God.
That's right, and they both are materialists, and they both too see nothing wrong with statism of a certain kind, which governs procreation, which governs medicine, which governs education. They want their little individual liberties, but that the state will allow them because that keeps everybody happy. So there is, this Marxism has penetrated very carefully. And by the way, at the back of it all, of course, is the grinning face of the devil. He knows that once materialism reigns, he has a hold of everything. The greatest proof, I think, Bernard, for us will be the continual unraveling of the most carefully laid plans. We planned something marvelous with Mr. Gorbachev in 1989, 1990. It unraveled. And we found ourselves on the opposite side of the fence in the Gulf. Mr. Gorbachev, wise enough, said, okay, I won't oppose it. No, I'm supplying missiles behind your back, and I'll give Saddam one, try and get him out of the hole. But he wouldn't, no, he's too clever. He's not going to oppose us on that. He knows that Saddam is for the graveyard anyway, soon. And he's only an accident, an ugly, dirty, smelly accident on the way to the new world order. And now we think that once, although we're getting a little more cautious, once we have complete military victory, that we now have to win the peace. And we will win the peace in the same way we won the war, by human power. And I tell you, Bernard, wait 6 months. Wait 6 months, and we have another conflagration on our hands. And it will unravel in that direction. And then it will unravel in another direction. And this is what Our Lady said would happen. It cannot succeed. Both those systems, the Leninist system of Mr. Gorbachev, his Marxism, and the capitalist system, carry the seeds of their own decay within them. And we are carried along with that. You know, the most pathetic thing is that we can't do anything about it. We are helpless because we are now in a systemically godless system. The system is taken over. No matter what you do, the system penetrates because it's systemic. It's throughout all. If you want to live and work, say, in the United States or Canada, there are certain things you can't do. You can't undo the educational system being imposed on us. You can't undo the legislation that favors abortion and euthanasia. You can't undo the permission for fetal experimentation. You can't undo these things any longer. We're in it. And in order to live in peace, you at least have to say, well, they have a right to do it. No, they haven't. Wrong never has a right. But we have to, otherwise you're lampooned. And as you know, in the United States today, we have a thing called the PCP, the politically correct person. And the politically correct and socially acceptable person. And among them are, for the United States, racial quotas, you must be in favor of it. Reverse discrimination, you must be in favor of it. Homosexual marriages, you must be in favor. You can't say that homosexuals have no rights to get married to each other. Same-sex parents, fetal experimentation, euthanasia, abortion, contraception. If you sat at a dinner table or went to a lecture hall and condemned any one of these things, you wouldn't talk any further. They'd throw you out. You wouldn't be invited if they know your opinions on these matters. You wouldn't be invited. You're excluded. So in order to live at peace, you just omit all conversation on it. And you don't act with your own children or your friends as if they were doing naughty things when they lived together, or they abort a child, or they experiment with their children, or they have in vitro fertilization, or they have embryos tucked away in the local laboratory for the time that they want to breed a child in somebody else's womb. You don't oppose that. That's progress. That's progress. So we're caught in a system today, and the system is all dominant. All dominant. That's our pathos. We are helpless. And what to do about that? That's a long question to answer. It's a question of faith and waiting, because Our Lady must come. You know, I was speaking to an Irishman a few weeks ago. He's from Boston, but he's a real Irishman. He said to me, I said, God must show his face one of these days. There's no solution for it all. Once more, God must show his face. That was his simple way. Appear up there and say, hey, stop all that nonsense. But no, that's not what the Church says. The Church firmly believes in Fatima. It knows the authentication of Fatima. It knows it's authentic. And the present Pope and those who are believers still, not in the majority of people amongst the clergy, they are waiting for Our Lady to do something about it. In the meantime, holding on. And we're losing every day in priests and nuns and bishops and practice of the faith. We're losing, losing, losing. But each one will be judged. You know, we were created collectively as a race, but we will be judged singly. And each one will answer. And I must say, for my own sins and peccadillos, I'm afraid when I meet God. Healthy fear. What must you think if you have indulged in the systemic abuses of our way of life? I don't think you can look at God. I think you're self-condemnatory. There was an old Christian tradition, you know, that when any man dies in any part of the world, he has an immediate vision of the crucifix, of the crucified Jesus. And in the light of what he sees, with understanding given him, he knows if he's with that or against it, and he flees or goes where he should go. That is an instant vision at death everybody has. It's a solid tradition in the Church that Augustine speaks about, and Jerome and all the saints spoke about. What will most of our contemporaries do when they see the face of the crucified Jesus and see the whole scheme of salvation in his blood and his heart and his crown of thorns and his eyes, and know that they have been its enemy all their lives?
Now perhaps we can look at the position of Christianity within this New World Order. You had said that it's in recess throughout the world. Let's take a look at what's happening to Christianity in the Middle East, where the center of the conflict has been recently.
Well, first of all, the Christians are in a vast minority there. Christianity itself, and the Roman Catholic Church in particular, have suffered severe damage in Lebanon already from the 15-year war there, because it was the biggest Christian community in the Middle East, the Maronite Church, with they're Roman Catholics, but they're the Maronite Rite, founded by St. Maron back in the 9th or 10th century. They've been liquidated, literally, and they're emigrating and they're dying out. They no longer have power there. They're going to be crushed out by the Muslims, who now have the majority power there. And they've been decimated in the war and the shelling and the killing that's taken place there. That stronghold of Christianity is on its way out. The second big block of Christians existed in Saddam Hussein's Iraq, the Chaldeans. They're Chaldeans, that is, that it's a rite in the church. They're Roman Catholics. They belong to the Pope, and he appoints their bishops. But they're Chaldean rite, it's different rite. They say a mass, by the way, in Aramaic, which is the nearest thing to our Lord's language. Unfortunately, they're headed by a patriarch, Raphael I Bidawid is his name, who is not only a friend of Saddam Hussein, but a strong supporter, and who thinks that Saddam Hussein is a saint. He regards him as a personal friend, as I said. He said Saddam would give you the shirt off his back, he's so kind. And when Saddam gassed and killed hundreds of thousands of Kurds in the north of Iraq, Patriarch Raphael said, well, what must a government do when there's an internal revolt? It's got to put it down, hasn't it? This man is amoral, the Patriarch, is in his judgment. He's desecrating his priesthood and his episcopal dignity. How can he speak like that about it? He knows exactly what Saddam is. He knows Saddam's life. Saddam is married to Sayyida, the poor girl, and he has 5 children by her. He's had a run of mistresses. He's killed off some of them and killed their brothers and sisters because they objected to his fooling around with them. He's an amoral man. He's even broken the laws of his own Sharia, the sacred law of Islam. The Patriarch knows this, but in order to have peace, and because Saddam is a friend of his and sends a car for him to bring him out to Baghdad, used to in his heyday, he's not going to offend him. Well, he's very proud of Saddam. But with that leadership, you know, as they used to say about 30 cents and a sandwich of bologna, that you'll get down as far as Grand Central, which is the New York phrase for helplessness. They are completely at sea. Now, they can't convert anybody. They're not allowed to evangelize. They're not allowed to convert any Muslims. They can't preach in public about Christianity. And they've been also reduced in size by Saddam. He's killed many of them, and a lot of them died in the war. They were drafted deliberately by Saddam and put down in Kuwait. So the church is in bad straits there. Elsewhere in the Middle East, there is no big Christian presence. There's no big Catholic presence. Now the church, the Roman Church, the Pope has his own ambassadors. He has a man in Baghdad, Marian Olish, Monsignor Marian Olish, a Polish diplomat who is attached to the Holy See. And he has diplomats all over the Middle East, in every Islamic country. But there is no headway, because Islam is firmly anti-Catholic and firmly anti-Christian. The only thing about Islam is its devotion to Our Lady. It has an amazing devotion to the mother of Jesus, as they call her, Miriam. And there are passages in chapter 41 of the Quran that you could read and get devotion out of them as a Catholic. The grinning figure of Satan.
This interview is a continuation of a 3-tape interview with Father Malachi Martin. And we are discussing the conflicts going on both in the world and in the church. And we were recently discussing the position of Christianity in the Middle East. And we had just discussed the fact that Muslims have a devotion to Our Lady. Father, do you think that perhaps Our Lady may yet bring Muslims back into the Christian fold by virtue of the fact that they do have this devotion?
I've been personally convinced of that as a personal opinion for many years. I don't think Our Lady does anything by accident. I don't think God allows anything to happen by accident. In fact, I don't think there are accidents in this world at all of God, even when there's evil rampant. And the fact that Muhammad, in spite of all the defects that we Christians see in him and his doctrine, because really Islam is a Christian heresy. That's what it really is. In spite of all that, I think that Our Lady ceded the means of converting Muslims finally to the reign of Christ. After all, Christ is honored in the sacred book, the Quran. He's a prophet, and he's honored. And you cannot dishonor him according to Muhammad, because he is a prophet. They don't believe that he is the Son of God. There was only one God called Allah, and Muhammad was his prophet, is the great saying of Islam. So I do think that Our Lady did in her, see, she has a cosmic stature now, Our Lady. She is the queen of the cosmos. She was crowned that when she was assumed into heaven. And I think in virtue of that, she and God have laid out a plan for the conversion of men, including Muslims, to Christ's faith and to Christ's doctrine. So I do think that the presence of Our Lady in the Quran, the devotion to Our Lady, is so huge, and the connection between Fatima, the key geopolitical event of this century, and Muslims and Our Lady, is so thick that logically I'm led to say she has her plans in those regards too. I must tell you, Bernard, one of the most moving things in my life was in Algiers, way many years ago, going to a shrine of Our Lady, which was an underground shrine in the middle of a street. You descended down, and it was a semicircle with a statue of Our Lady and the child Jesus. And most of the women kneeling there and standing and praying were Muslim women. They were praying to the Virgin, Miriam as they call her. So there's this real devotion. And you know that all the saints, and the one who really propagated the idea and insisted on it was Alphonsus Liguori. He said that anybody with a devotion to the Virgin has to be saved, because she's mother. And she will not let any child of hers who loves her be lost. And there's no doubt about it that it is a sign of predestination to have a devotion to Our Lady. And those that have not got it, you can doubt about their final destiny in the next world. So from every point of view, I've personally been convinced for many years that there is a big turn coming there. And you know, Bernard, in God's plans, the way God works, the way he uses things, with his long-range view and his knowledge of everything that's going to happen, no doubt about it, the Gulf War that's taking place at the present moment is leavening Islam. We are now in the middle of Islam. It's no longer forbidden ground for us. We can walk around there. They love to have us. In fact, you know, the joke that they had was that the
the national anthem of the Saudi Arabians changed in the middle of the Gulf War. It was Onward Christian Soldier, because there were so many Christians fighting for Saudi Arabia. But it does make the point I'm making, that we now are acceptable to them as friends. We weren't before. We were dirty infidels who bought their oil. Now it's different. So I guess there's a leavening process there, and it's going to go on because God is all-powerful, and he finally brings all the ends and strings of events, he brings them to the final pattern that he wants to create out of the human race's history. Now, that's as God's Our Lady. There's a far more distressing fact about the Gulf War, which
Let's talk about the church's response to the Gulf War.
Yes, the church's response to the Gulf War is something which distresses me an awful lot. Look, Bernard, you see, the Catholic Church is arranged in such a way. It has a structure of bishops, and those are under the Pope. And the attitude of the Church on major questions, and the Gulf War is certainly a major question, and the New Order is certainly an essential question. Normally, the word descends from the Pope to the bishops, and they repeat and hand out what Catholics must think about, say, the Gulf War. Now, you have noticed, and everybody has noticed, that we have got no leading thought, guidelines, from either Pope or Vatican or bishops. Some bishops have said there's a great war. Some people, most of them in this country, are against the war in the Gulf. And but I want to talk about the Holy Father for a moment in this connection. He is John Paul II. He is a geopolitical pope. He is widely traveled. He knows every government that's at war at the present moment. He knows them all by name. He sat down with them in their private rooms and talked with them, as well as visiting their people. He's known. And he's a geopolitical pope in the sense that he thinks of the world as one vast chessboard in which there are various things being moved around, and he has to move the pawns and the kings and the knights that belong to the church in that vast game of politics. Because at that level of geopolitics, religion and geopolitics are linked together. There's no division. Now, why hasn't he spoken about it explicitly? Well, there's a tradition in the church, which we must examine, and this is a very important point for Catholics. For instance, take Pius XII. I know personally, and anybody who's researched the subject knows, that Pius XII, Papa Pacelli as they call him, Eugenio Pacelli, was personally responsible for the saving of 1.3 million Jews, himself personally. Now that's apart from what his priests and nuns did by hiding Jews throughout Italy and throughout Poland and throughout France and Belgium, which they did. But he himself personally saved 1.3 million. Yet, Bernard, if you mention Pius XII's name in the presence of modern Jews or modern Christians, they say, but he didn't say anything about Hitler's horrors. They blame him still. Why? Because now for about 150 years, it has been the policy of the Holy See, when nations are at war, not to speak about the right or the wrong on either side. And therefore, Pope Pacelli, Pope Pius XII, came out with general statements like, war is bad, racism must be condemned, people must not be persecuted on account of their ethnic background or their religion. General statements, which never pinpointed anybody. It just gave general statements that applied to all sides. And the policy of the Holy See has a reason. For instance, when the Argentina and Chile were squaring off to fight in the early 80s, the Pope sent an emissary over there, and he met them both in Montevideo, and they arranged a peace. But before that, the Pope said, just condemned war in general as a recourse to settle arguments. Never mentioned Chile, never mentioned the Argentine. The policy has been never to mention two warring nations, because they both are praying to God. The priests on both sides are saying Mass that their side wins. You know what human beings are. So the Holy See said, we will abstain from pinpointing any particular country, but we will talk about the general principles. That was fine and dandy when it was nation against nation, or even a group of nations against a group of nations, an empire against an empire. But something radical has changed in our world. What's the change? The change is that for the first time in 6,000 years of history, there is now a moral consensus on the part of the majority of nations to create a community of power. That changes the whole equation. Changes it to such a way that we are now faced with the fact that our country is going to be aligned with others It may be the leader economically or militarily or diplomatically, but it's aligned with others whose will it must share in deciding the fate of the world. It's not the fate of America, the fate of France, or the fate of Iraq alone. It's a big geopolitical decision. In that case, to my simple mind, in this case, the Pope, the Vatican, should have come out with a white paper describing exactly what Saddam Hussein had done and saying, this is unacceptable. And come out with another white paper on the coalition of the nations and the UN and say they have no right to insist that Saddam is wrong since they have been so wrong themselves and they're going for money and for oil. Be specific. I think this is the time when we finally have to drop the general idea of talking about principles in general and pinpoint international, transnational villains and transnational sins. Take Lebanon, for instance. Lebanon has been distressed for 15 years. Yet all that's come from the Vatican, or from anybody, is general statements about we must make peace, we must have dialogue, we must seek amity. It doesn't help anybody. It doesn't pinpoint anybody. The church finally, I think, has to come out and state quite blandly, and knowing that it will be attacked by one side or the other, this is right and this is wrong. They did wrong in doing this. The invasion and rape of Kuwait were morally wrong and unacceptable. And that has not been done. The result is that Roman Catholics are divided. They don't know what's right and what's wrong morally. They don't know what side is Christ's. A lot of them will say America is on the side of Christ. A lot of them will say no, Christ is on the side of the Arabs. At least they have Islam. They're religious. Sure, there was a very naughty gentleman called Saddam Hussein there. And there's no moral judgment given, and therefore we're confused. And that's the mark of the church today. There is no clear moral instruction given by the authentic and authoritarian voice of the Pope and of the Vatican. And as far as our bishops go, there is no recourse whatever. They are as confused and as venal as the politicians are. They haven't come out with any clear statements at all. They've tried some. We had 3 bishops on national television with some commentators. One of them was Roger O'Mahony of Los Angeles. And the way these 3 bishops talked, you'd think that they were having a gentle scholastic discussion in the seminary while people were going to die and moral consciences were going to be revolted or were going to be twisted. They were afraid to come out with anything. They were afraid to back the US government, afraid to back away from it, afraid to back Saddam Hussein, but afraid not to back him. You know, it's a completely spineless morality.
And I think that's why I have found there's absolutely no consensus whatsoever among Catholics about what should have been done.
None. And you know then what happens, Bernard? The terrible thing happens. Okay, we joined the armed forces, and I'm in the tank corps, and you're an airman. You're a pilot. Now, we all know, with any experience, that if I'm in the tank corps and you're in your plane, you will not function properly unless you're prejudiced against the man you're going to attack. Unless when I see a tank I say, well, my goodness, I got to destroy that guy. And anger and the lust to kill must be in my heart. I can't be mild or meek. I can't say, hey, if you don't move out of the way, war is war. I have to have the anger and the lust to kill and the lust to maim and the lust to destroy. Those are sins, unless the war is just. And simply you with your plane and your precision bombing, you see you're going to bomb this particular area here, and this particular area is going to, the civilians are going to be killed as well as military men. You must want to destroy it. Otherwise you won't press that button, you won't pull that lever. So war does funny things to men. Everybody who's been to war, he will tell you that's going over the top of a trench to attack the enemy. You've got to want to kill him, otherwise you're going to be killed. So it does rouse up these passions, and unless they are justified by the moral law, and therefore endorsed by the church you believe in, the Roman Catholic Church, or by its highest authority, you're launched in a sea of vague morality. And what takes over? The natural passions. The natural passions. And the idea of true patriotism is lost, and love of one's country, and compassion for the enemy, compassion for your neighbor, is lost. It has to be. Now, we have had great restraint, but our avoidance of civilian targets and our compassion is politically motivated. We want to corrupt the Iraqis and draw them away from Saddam. We also don't want to get a bad name and get public opinion against us, because we wanted to hold our coalition together. So the coalition could obtain the aims we have in mind, which are oil and profits. So, you know, without clear moral direction, and there's one or more aspect to it, there's therefore no respect for the Catholic Church's voice, because it's silent. It doesn't take a stance. And therefore there's no respect, because this world does respect one thing. If you stand up and you make it stick what you hold for, they respect it. And there's still a lurking respect for Saddam Hussein that he held on, in spite of everything. We respect this, even though we condemn him and say he's crazy, he's a madman, he's a looter, he's a killer, he's a rapist. There's this, and the Arabs are full of it too. He stood up to 33 nations. Sure, he lost, but he stood up to them. He told you to go to hell. That's their attitude. And we admire him for that, and they do. Now, they'll lose that when they find out that their oil is gone, and their economies are affected, and the Jordanians are going to start having pains in their bellies, and the Iraqis are going to be hungry, and finally they'll fling him out because he's ruined their country. But the mere fact of resisting and standing for what you hold does evoke admiration. If it does it in the case of Saddam Hussein, how more so in a group of people who stand for morality, who say, no, this is wrong, or this is right, whatever is the stance. And it does, too, be the strength of armies, remember? It is the strength of armies. They have a moral stance. They're morally persuaded of it, and not persuaded merely for career purposes. It's the job. There was a Marine colonel, after one big battle with Saddam Hussein's tanks in the KTO, the Kuwaiti Theater of Operation, who was asked, well, how do you feel about it? He said, this is a job I'm paid to do. The job I'm paid to do. There was no trace of love of America, love of freedom. No, he's paid to do it. And he does it well. But that is amoral. I mean, there's no morality at all in it. I have a job to kill you because you're the enemy, I'll kill you. Now, without a directive from the church, based on the doctrine of Christ, and not on a mealy-mouthed Christ who turns the other cheek. Christ never turned the other cheek, by the way. The one time he was struck in the cheek, in the house of Caiaphas, he didn't say, strike the other one, please. He turned round to the man who did it, and with a face that man will never forget, here in eternity, he said, why did you strike me? If I've spoken ill, say so. If I've done something wrong, if I've done nothing, why did you dare strike me? That wasn't turning the other cheek. This idea of turning the other cheek is not Christian at all. But there is a doctrine of the just war. There is a doctrine of Christ's aim in the world, and that has not been laid out for men. And increasingly, as we walk into the New World Order, with its stringent control of our liberties, and the reduction of our influence in religion and education and in public morality, we're going to find the voice of the church not there. And therefore more confusion. And people saying, well, the church hasn't spoken, I'll take my options. And we know where those options go.
Let's take a look now at the church's response to the Soviet Union and to communism and the situation in Eastern Europe.
Well, Bernard, first of all, we should have a small review of what the Eastern Europe is like and what Russia is like religiously. It's essentially that, you know, whenever you want to comment, I found anyway, whenever I want to comment on a situation in a particular part of the world, the basis of it is good intelligence about conditions. So the first thing is, what is religion like over there? What is the mentality over there? Now, no matter what anybody says about faith and about the Russian church and the Orthodox church and the perseverance of the faithful in their religion, this must be said about both the Soviet population and the populations of all 5 satellite countries. You cannot perpetuate a public lie for 45 years through radio, television, newspapers, and education. We are 2 generations almost in a lie about communism and about God and about faith, which the communists did, without that bastardizing their mentality. The point I'm making here is the point everybody makes about the Soviet Union. When they go over there and come back, they say, these people have been mongrelized. They've been bastardized. They have no morality of work, of duty, or responsibility. It's survival. They've been driven down to the lowest level you can get. And therefore there's no unity amongst them. There's no nobility of cause. They're not inflamed with a new ideal. There's no ideal coming from religion. And this is the same in Czechoslovakia, and in Hungary, and Yugoslavia, and Poland, and in East Germany, now a part of Germany, and in the Soviet Union. So that's the condition of things. Now, There is certainly a body of Orthodox believers that have clung on to their faith and are now coming out with their processions and with their celebrations that have taken over churches. Almost 4,000 churches have been opened since Mr. Gorbachev came in 1985. It's part of his policy. Let them have their playthings. Let them have their churches. There's no harm in that for him. And the Pope has chosen a certain number of priests, and he has dispatched them to Eastern Europe to teach them what has gone on in the church since Vatican II, because they know nothing about it. They haven't got the Novus Ordo Mass. They haven't got the new doctrine of religious liberty. They haven't got the new doctrine about women priests, because the majority of those going into Eastern Europe are now Jesuits. And the Jesuits, as you know, are anti-papal, and they're strictly neo-Catholic. That is, they haven't got officially they don't profess papal doctrine any longer. They have another form of Catholicism, which in my opinion is not traditional Catholicism. The difficulty is that the populations in those countries and in Russia want only one thing: liberty. But liberty spells certain things for them. They want VCRs, they want cars, they want refrigerators, they want contraceptives, they want easy abortion, they want travel, they want good salaries, they want silken sheets in their bed, they want plentiful food, they want supermarkets. They're not looking for worship. They're not looking for belief. They have been driven so low, they've been so mongrelized, socially and personally and as a group, that they are no longer looking to the horizon to say, now let's see what God's face is like. No, they don't. They want the good life. The good life. Now, there is a solid core of believers still, say, in the Ukraine, which suffered much. There's a solid core of believers in Lithuania, and there's a solid core of believers in other parts of Russia. But there is no overall yearning and thirst for Christianity, for Catholicism. It doesn't exist. It's been killed off. The Russian Orthodox Church was the main author of that, because the Russian Orthodox Church officially prostituted itself, and it consented to conditions that meant it was going to go down. Conditions like what? Well, in 1946, they condemned the Ukrainian Catholic Church. They went along with Stalin's idea of bayonets, killing off 4 million of them, and then 16 million later in the hunger that Stalin initiated, called the Harvest of Sorrow by the Americans who studied it. And they then consented that the highest echelons, anybody above a simple priest in the Russian Orthodox Church, would belong to the KGB and would inform on the church. And the church has always supported Stalin's wars, and always supported Stalin, preached adhesion to the motherland under the banner of Lenin. It prostituted itself. And I remember meeting the Russian clergymen who came down to the Vatican Council and saying to them, why did you do that? Two of them in particular, the two observers that Khrushchev sent down. And they spoke excellent English and excellent Italian too. And they said to us, we have had to live in hell, and we don't think we're ever going to get out of it. Both politically, morally, and religiously. They know they had gone wrong, but they couldn't do anything else. They were helpless. So this is the situation there. Now, there is no upturn in that situation. There is no vast converts. You know, we make 16,000 converts per day in Africa. 16,000. We lose 7,400 in Western Europe every day, by the way. We lose it by death, by divorce, by apostasy. In Russia, there's no vast conversions. People are not interested. They're after the good life. They want what we have. And one of the reasons for being angry with Khrushchev is that he hasn't brought capitalism in fast enough for them. So there's no upturn there at all. On top of all that, it would be ridiculous if anybody suggested that Mr. Gorbachev was seeking the kingdom of God. The policy of Khrushchev is Leninist. He wants to institute the atheistic state dreamed of by Mr. Lenin and Mr. Stalin and Mr. Khrushchev and all the other people, Brezhnev and all the others that preceded him. He is an agent of the devil, and there's no doubt about that. Now, with that conditions, with that exact intelligence about Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, there is no hope there, except that Our Lady, blandly and quietly and gently but firmly, as only she can say, told Lucia that the safety of the world. That's the safety of you and me, of your Canada and my United States and Western Europe and the rest of the world. The safety of the world will be achieved because Russia will be converted and she will do the converting. So Catholics will be very wrong if they think that there's the present Pope and the present Vatican and the present Roman Catholic Church has now got a huge field of harvest of souls and it can create a huge wave of conversions. Don't have that delusion. Our Lady made it quite clear that Russia will spread its errors throughout the world and would ruin the world, except that she will convert it by a miracle. There's no vast conversions coming.
This is a very important point because very often people in the West have romantic ideas about Christianity in Eastern Europe.
Oh, yeah, they have. They have, and it's, I know. You can meet people from Eastern Europe, and I've met them, and I talk from Russia and from the other, the Baltic countries, and also from the former satellite countries. You meet them, and you're touched by their faith. The faith is woven into their language. In Russia, for instance, in Russian, when you say "пожалуйста" or "спасибо," please or thank you, those words are laden with Christian ideas, and I won't waste your time by going through them, but they mean beautiful things, Christianly speaking. But they're used now like please and thank you. And Mr. Gorbachev says "пожалуйста" and "спасибо," and he simply means nothing religious by it. The whole thing has been prostituted. But we have marvelous ideas about Russian icons and Russian monks and the pealing, reverberating chant of the monks in Zagros monastery and this ancient religion that has slept, that has persevered through the dark night of persecution. No, it didn't persevere through that. It prostituted itself. It became a member of it. It supplied its force. It gave it inspiration. It dragooned Christians into the Leninist armies. It went along with the killing of citizens. It went along with the killing of all the Catholic bishops of the Ukraine. It consented to that. Oh, no, no, no. This church is guilty beyond belief. Do you know that when Romania broke, as it were, had its revolution, you know what happened to the Russian Orthodox clergymen? They fled the country. Because they had backed the regime. They had backed Ceausescu, the butcher of Bucharest, and therefore they were going to be killed. They fled. To give them their due, the Catholics had not done that. They had just done nothing and lived underground, as all religion did. So there is that dreadful condition of Eastern Europe. And those who said that, Our Lady's already converting Russia when the Berlin Wall fell down, oh gee, it almost brought tears to my eyes, the wishful thinking in that.
This is a controversy now. Do you think that the consecration of Russia has already been done?
Oh no. Oh, no. Nobody in his right senses thinks that. Now, there are priests and bishops that speak like that, but they're speaking either out of ignorance or malice. The consecration of Russia is a very definite thing. It's a very definite thing. I mean, it's like saying, do you know Bernard Jansen? Yes, I do, because I've seen his face. I know his nose and his hair and the height and the way he walks and talks. The consecration of Russia, the consecration, according to Lucia, was very simple, but very exact. It had to be a formula used by all the bishops and the Pope on the same day, the same formula. It had to be worldwide. It had definite things to say. One of the things it was going to say was the errors of the Soviet Union, the errors of Russia. And that at the same time, that was to be done. The third Fatima secret, the hidden letter, was to be published. That's the consecration. It has to be collegial, by all the bishops in union with the Pope on the same day, and if possible, giving the variation of the various hours across the time of day at the same time, and accompanied by the publication of the letter. That has not been done. What has been done is what could be done. Pius XII twice consecrated the human race to Our Lady's Immaculate Heart, and he mentioned Russia. And John Paul II, when he was over in Fatima, consecrated the human race, and he mentioned Russia. That's not what Our Lady asked for. So the consecration has not been done. And any effort to say that the consecration done on March 24, 1985, by the Holy Father in Rome, is the collegial consecration urged by Lucia, by Our Lady to Lucia, Lucia to us, is either, as I say, ignorant or malicious.
Well, the fruits simply aren't there. As you mentioned, Eastern Europeans are turning to Western materialism.
Yes,
they're not turning to Christianity.
And you see, it's also a crass way of thinking of Our Lady, because Our Lady says very little. Well, when she says it, she means every word of it. And when she said Russia will be converted, she meant Russia will be converted. Not that they sort of, as we say, put creases in their trousers and take baths and use deodorant. That's not conversion. That's not conversion. Conversion means they turn and acknowledge the rule of Christ through the Roman Catholic Church on this earth in the name of Our Lady, the Virgin Mother of God. That's conversion. That has not taken place. There is no sign of it. There's no upturn, whatever. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. In fact, we're still in the middle of a tunnel in the whole matter. But a lot of interest. You see, but there's one more fact which I think we should bring to the notice of everybody, if they don't know it already. Within the church and churchmen, within the churchmen, there is a substantial body of bishops and cardinals who are utterly opposed to two things. They're opposed to the Roman Mass, as we used to know it, prior to Vatican II, and they're opposed to anything to do with Our Lady. They don't want any news of Fatima. They don't want any news of Garabandal. They don't want any news about Akita. They don't want any news about Lourdes. These things are forbidden. They no longer are useful. The church must now merge with the world and lose all this hocus pocus, this nonsense, this superstition. Now, the fact that that is the way, and that from the Vatican, not from John Paul II, but from members of the Vatican, has come an effort to muzzle Sister Lucia, which has taken place, and also to inspire several people writing in America and England and Europe and Australia to attack Fatima and to denigrate it and put it in a lesser light. This is a sign that Satan, as Pope Paul VI said, the smoke of Satan is around the sanctuary and around the altar. He's within us. He is penetrated. He has got inside the walls.
We have been discussing the situation of the church in the Middle East and in Eastern Europe. Now let's discuss it in the West. And you had mentioned that we have a Pope who is surrounded by men who are frustrating his will, that he cannot govern the church. What is the situation of the church in the West? Is it like that?
The situation, yes, although we should elaborate slightly on that. Any rational observer, and by the way, I'm talking now about non-Catholics and non-Christians, we have plenty of those in the United States and in Canada, who comment on the condition of the church. The note running through it all is the total breakdown of Catholicism as a religion and as a public force. There is abroad among us now a fracturing tendency. We have broken into pieces. The bishops no longer reflect a unified doctrine. They plunge off into various highways and byways of their own choosing, or they shut up completely. They've been completely secularized. The practice of the faith is diminishing. Every year it's diminishing. And by the way, let's not talk vaguely. This comes down to statistics. Now, I know there are lies, damn lies, and statistics, the three kinds of lies that Dr. Johnson spoke about, but still, they tell a story. If you line up on a sheet of paper the number of priests, the number of monks, the number of vocations, the number of nuns, the number of Catholic high schoolers, junior and senior, the number of Holy Communions, the number of confessions, it's a plumb line down. It's a straight down line. It's not even a wavy graph. It's straight down. The practice of contraception, the practice of abortion, the acceptance of homosexuality as a third way of life, an alternative lifestyle, is widespread. Today, in any normally educated, cultured American establishment, I'm sure it's the same in Canada, if you came out, as we said at the beginning of these tapes, if you said that you were wholly against abortion and contraception, homosexuality, you wouldn't be invited back. You'd be regarded as a fanatic and a bigot. And many bishops have said to themselves, oh, I won't be invited to the dinner table anymore. I won't be invited to the green top tables of power in the city. And they don't speak about it. It's dropped from their agenda.
And the pro-life movement in Canada is considered to be an embarrassment to the bishops.
It's like somebody who wants to reinstate the use of the stocks to punish people in public, or or spanking children with a cane, or some vile practice of the Middle Ages, cutting off a hand of a man who steals a sheep. It's considered to be so prejudiced, so inhuman, so undecent. It's incompatible with democratic ideals, and the church is conforming to that. And there is no clear instruction on it. The pro-life movement is a valiant movement, but it itself is riven with people who are not pro-life really, There is no real pro-life movement. I'll tell you something about it. In this country, whatever about Canada, if the bishops and the cardinals made up their mind, they could stop abortion tomorrow. They could flood the streets. Supposing, for instance, that there was one place in Chicago or in New York where Jews were burnt in an oven, do you think it would last one day? 1 day, 1 hour. The thing would be overrun. Public sentiment would rise up and say, let's destroy it ourselves. The police would stand by. Yet in abortories throughout all our cities, there are little babies being killed, 4,000 per day. Nothing is done about it. If the Catholic Church mustered even, say, 1/2 of its 56 million members in this country, what do you think would happen? There'd be riots, demonstrations. The police, the law establishment would have to do something about it. They couldn't get away with it, but they will not do that because they don't want the trouble. They don't want to be unpopular. They don't want martyrdom because some of them would die. So it's a lack of courage. It's a lack of persuasion. Many priests think abortion is fine. Many bishops think it's fine. Some cardinals we know think it's fine. Nothing wrong with it at all, except the church hasn't become modern, hasn't woken up to the realities of democratic institutions yet. Doesn't know what democratic liberty is. In other words, they've lost their faith. They're no longer Catholics. They have now become some form of neo-Catholic, which is halfway between Episcopalians and Rotarian Presbyterians. There's no Catholic faith left in them at all. So that's the condition of the church. Now then, in education it's worse, and that is the lamentable part of it. There is no doubt about it that the teaching of catechism, the teaching of religion, has disappeared. Partly because we've done away with the nuns. They're now on political and social careers. And the big teaching orders of nuns have ceased to function. And therefore that wellspring of education of a child from the age of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 on in Christian doctrine has disappeared. On top of all that, the great teaching orders, the Jesuits, Dominicans, the Carmelites, the Franciscans, have become thoroughly secularized. And you can no longer speak about a Catholic college. You have a college which used to belong to a religious order, say the Jesuits, which is now run by majority laymen with 1 or 2 Jesuits, usually old, there, and a Jesuit rector, pro forma, but there is no Catholic college. In fact, they don't want to be called Catholic colleges. The Jesuits met there last year and they decided they would no longer call their 29 colleges Catholic colleges. They would call them Ignatian institutes because they work in the spirit of St. Ignatius. I think St. Ignatius must be turning in his grave or revolving in heaven at the mere idea. So education is taken out of our hands and we have consented to it. And there is no gainsaying the damage that is done. Now you meet young people who don't know the Hail Mary or the Our Father, can't make an act of contrition, don't go to confession, go to Holy Communion if they have to, don't know what is in Holy Communion. They think it's bread merely blessed by a priest, and who wants bread blessed by a priest? It's far better to have something they buy in a pizzeria or they buy in a McDonald's. They haven't got the faith any longer. Simply they were not taught. They don't know anything about it. I always remember the time that I brought a young man in to a Catholic church, and over the altar there was hanging a crucifix. He'd never seen a crucifix. And he said, when he saw the blood and the crown of thorns and the wounds, he said, why did they do that to the poor guy? He didn't notice Jesus. Jesus did not connote crucifixion. And as you know now, we haven't got crucifixes, we have resurrectifixes. That is a picture of Christ being resurrected in glory. And he doesn't look like Christ at all. So the education of the young is lamentable. And there is no movement to make it any better at all. And the recent row between the American bishops and the Vatican over education ended in the Vatican retiring. And the American religious establishment being allowed to totally secularize their education and have Marxists and lesbians and homosexuals with equal rights on Catholic campuses, teaching about condoms, teaching about the homosexual way of life, teaching about euthanasia, because they want to be in the swim. They want to be like the others. They want to buy into the system, and the system is amoral. So the condition of the church, the perspective on it, is very sad from that point of view. And the fact is then that it's also riven by factions within. The vast majority of Catholics in Western countries have now been weaned away from the church as it was. They no longer pray the same way. They no longer worship the same way. They no longer think the same way. Fast and abstinence has gone out. Fast and abstinence, that's medieval. You don't do that any longer. That's cruelty. It's sadism. It's psychologically twisted, according to the modern doctrine. You must have sex. And there are bishops in this country who send young priests to institutes run by non-Catholics where they're advised to go out and have a woman or a boy in order to become healthy-minded and to masturbate. This is official. And I'm not mentioning the name of those bishops, or the name of those priests, or the name of those institutes, but that's what happens. It's thoroughly being secularized. That's because faith has disappeared. Faith has disappeared from the church on the whole. And by the way, this is what Our Lady said in Fatima. Faith would disappear, except from Portugal. Except from Portugal.
Now this leads in very well to an issue which seems to be becoming the crux or the focal point of the battle for Catholicism. And that is the area of the priesthood. Because the liberals have seemed to have gunned for the priesthood as the area in which to make even further changes within the church.
As they have.
Why do you think they chose the priesthood?
Because without priests, you have not got people who offer the sacrifice of the Mass. We can talk about that in a moment, but just think about priesthood. The attack on it is huge. The attack on it is so successful that when you make a survey of the bishops, say, in the USA, you become convinced that most of them don't want priests any longer. I know bishops who call up young priests whom they can't get to conform to their neo-Catholic stance. They tell them to go away. They laicize them. They leave them without any money. They leave them without any work. And they lack priests in their dioceses. They lack them. They do nothing about their seminaries. The seminaries themselves, many seminaries are rife with homosexuality, where it's approved to be healthy. You must experience sexuality with your fellows, besides going to the local city or the local, wherever you want to have sexuality. Now, the priesthood is under attack because without a priesthood, a solid priesthood, which is faithful in doctrine and which reproduces the doctrine of Rome, the Roman Catholic doctrine, and is faithful to the Pope, you're not going to have a Catholic population. There was a saying always when I was a young man, it's true, that if there isn't a sermon on Catholic morality and the papacy, at least once a year in every parish, that parish is going to go to hell. It always does. Now, I've been in this country 27 years, Bernard. I've never yet heard, in the thousands of churches I've been in, I've never heard a sermon on the Pope. Never heard a sermon on the papacy, or on Peter's authority. Never once. In 27 years, count all those Sundays, 365 of them. Not once, never once, from anybody, never once. And there's never an article on the papacy. There's never a study of the papacy, an examination of its claims and its authority and its history, except to abuse it. Except to abuse it. Scurrilous stories told about this pope or that pope, or about where the pope is wrong, or what a foolish man he is, and this present pope is a Polish archbishop that wandered by mistake into the papacy. The desecration of it all. But the idea is to do away with priesthood. The thing that really militates against the popular taste today about priesthood is celibacy. You see, they regard, nowadays, in the society in which we live, the expression of sexuality, whether within marriage or outside of marriage, whether by yourself or with somebody of the same sex, or with an animal, is regarded as quite normal, if you don't frighten the horses, so to speak, provided you don't violate any rule of decent living. The idea that men, young men of 20, say, take a vow of celibacy, that they will never get married, and they can keep that without getting twisted and psychologically moronic, and finally ending up in pedophilia or in sadism or in some twisted psychology. That is the normal attitude to priests today. So the idea of Roman Catholic celibacy is something that is utterly alien to the mind. Why? Because the idea of priesthood is, and this is where the great lack in teaching in seminaries and in the Catholic populace lies. You see, a priest, Christ was once asked, what do you think? They pointed out a eunuch to him. A eunuch was somebody who accidentally, or for some reason or other, couldn't have sex. His genitals were destroyed or something. And somebody said to him, Lord, what do you think of the eunuch? Well, he said there are three kinds of eunuchs. There's the man who's born like that from nature, deficient in other words, he hasn't got the wherewithal. There's the one who men made a eunuch, because they used to castrate people to make them eunuchs, because eunuchs are very useful in palaces, because they wouldn't touch the women, and they were very good guards. And eunuchs then always developed a very great cruelty, I suppose in reaction to their mutilation. And then the voice, if you did that, the voice remained high-pitched and beautiful well into teenage. And then he said that there's a third kind of eunuch who does it to himself for the sake of the kingdom of God. And then he said, very mysteriously, whoever understands, let him understand. Qui potet intelligere capiat. Who can understand this, understand it. Meaning there's a very deep mystery. The mystery is this. I can look at my celibacy, if I'm a priest, as a chastity belt, and the church has locked it and thrown away the key. In that case, then, I'm just somebody deprived of what I should have a right to by a greater force. They've thrown away the key. And that's not celibacy at all. That's enforced continence. I can look on celibacy then as something which is acceptable to the church, but is a pain in the neck, or a pain somewhere else. I still am very far from it. The celibate is somebody who says to himself, or herself, a nun, my greatest power of love is in reproduction and in living with another human being, and in having children, and exchanging our love and warmth and friendship and confidence, and giving each other the intimacy of our very being, soul and body, which a true marriage does. But I will give that up, because when I become a priest, Christ puts a seal on my soul, the seal of his priesthood. And that seal cordons me off for a higher destiny. And the destiny is to have a very, very, very particular union with God, with Christ. And that union is the union of somebody who's going to hold God's body in his hands at Mass, and who's going to be a special emissary, bringing blessing and shriving people from their sins and healing their souls. That's what true celibacy is. It's a segregation of your soul from all the lovely things in life that human love can bring and marriage can bring. By the way, look, it also has its ills and its difficulties. But in general, it's regarded as a great benefit to be married, or to live with somebody, as we do nowadays. But to cut that off deliberately, and to do it lovingly, and to make it a positive contribution, and to devote all the energies that nature has given us for human love, devote them to Christ, and to concentrate all that on the sacrifice of Christ and the preaching of his gospel and the transmission of his message of love and salvation to souls, and healing them and shriving them and helping them and supporting them, guiding them and welcoming them to the truth. That is the highest vocation a man can have. It is, in the order of perfection, it is a higher order. Similarly with a nun who takes a vow of celibacy, a vow of chastity, the same thing. She says to herself, I'm going to imitate Our Lady, who is a virgin, who is a mother of God. I'm going to have spiritual children, and most of Our Lady's children are spiritual. She had only one child of her own called Jesus. But I'm going to have those children by my prayers and by my identity with the great mother, the mother of God. And I'm going to do that by renouncing this, not because it's ill or bad. It's not bad, it's good. God made it, it's good, it's good. He said increase and multiply. Love each other, be one flesh. It's a sacrament in the new covenant. But I'm going to renounce that because I want to have a greater identification with Our Lady, because God is calling me to that. And all the love and the sympathy and the empathy and the perceptiveness of love, I'm going to transfer that to Our Lady and our Lord. And I'm going to make that my special sacrifice. And in the beginning it is a sacrifice. And then with the passage of time and fidelity, suddenly this flower blooms in their souls. And they achieve this marvelous tranquility and this marvelous warmth that people always saw in the traditional priest. This amazing power to get inside you, this light, this feeling that they were there for you. There weren't rhythm in their sympathies. And they were there for you because Christ was their man. Christ was their king. Christ was their high priest. That idea of priesthood. Bernard, you won't find that anywhere today. In Catholic manuals, or preached from sermons, or anything like that. Celibacy is regarded as a sort of like fish on Friday, a law that we want to change and do away with. Many want to do away with, many bishops want to do away with, and Father Richard McBride of Notre Dame has written very, very, very succinctly that he's looking forward to the day when Mrs. Pope comes out on the balcony with Mrs. Pope, with Mr. Pope, and gives their joint blessing to many, many married priests and married nuns down below. I mean, if a man like that, teaching in a Catholic, so-called Catholic college, university, the University of Notre Dame, can write that and say that in public and contradict Catholic doctrine, well, two things immediately come to your mind. First of all, he ceases to be Catholic. And secondly, he's a very, very insolent man to propose that irreverently. He just doesn't understand. And I just wonder what on earth he regards his celibacy. How does he act, really? Celibately? Certainly not in his mind.
And what would be the consequences of a married priesthood within the Catholic Church?
Well, I'll tell you what would be the consequences of it. You know, Luther, in his last speech, he died suddenly at night after a big banquet, and he gave his most vituperative speech about the papacy. And by the way, Luther could turn the air blue with his language. They will not translate some of it into English. They leave it in old German. And when she said it, even the German stinks. It turns your ears blue. But in the middle of it all, he said, he had married, as you know, he had married a nun called Catherine Bormann. We still have their rings. And he said, let us all marry nuns. Let nuns and priests marry, and let us go forth and convert the world to Christianity, and let those crook-shanked Roman celibates die out. Well, you know, Bernard, that was in the 16th century. And in those 4 centuries, the crook-shanked Roman Catholics went out and they converted and made a church of 900 million. The married clergy of Protestantism, of various kinds, brands, and description of Protestantism, have lost out. They didn't convert anybody. They shrank and shrank and shrank down to the miserable remnants that they are today. Lifeless, without vibrancy, without any direction whatever, and losing hand over fist. If we are bad, in a bad condition, they are in a terrible condition. They're eviscerated ruins. The point is this that I am making to you, that if we were to do that, we would immediately change the face of priesthood. Because it is an apostolic fact that priests must be celibate. An apostolic fact. We know that Peter took his wife with him wherever he went, except when he went to Rome. But they lived in continence. And the law in the early church was, you see, they had very few people to ordain priests then. So they picked any man, a married man, an unmarried man, mostly married. And when they ordained a married man, he and his wife had to take a vow of celibacy. They lived together because it was a sacrament, but they were no longer, they were celibate. Then when they got a bevy of young men in the later years, they started ordaining them and imposing celibacy. The practice of a married priesthood came in as an abuse, tolerated by the Holy See. And it was only tolerated in the Greek and Russian church, in Eastern Christianity, as we say. It was never tolerated in the West, where they maintained the celibacy. If you haven't got a celibate clergy, well, sociologically the change is very interesting, because first of all you have to support your wife and children. That's an economic factor. Number 2, there's the fact that the unicity of the priest, his unique devotion to his parishioners, is gone. He has a wife at home. And he goes home at night, or he goes home during the day, and she knows all about the parish and the parishioners. And immediately you change the equation of parish priests to parishioners, even sociologically. And personally you change it, because then I know that you're not completely independent. There's a woman talking to you. She's your wife. You love her. I remember when I was a chaplain to the U.S. Air Force in Turkey, having to make long trips with the officers that went up to see the radar domes on the Black Sea, where we ringed around Russia to listen to what they were saying. And one of them said to me once, after a long discussion, 18 hours driving, he said to me, you know, Father, he said, I couldn't talk to you like this if you were married like Woody. Woody was the Protestant chaplain, a very decent man. He said, I couldn't talk to you like this about these things. I wouldn't dare do it. He said, because you'd have a wife, and you can compare yourself, and she could, I mean, he said that it's the end of the priest-client relation. And it's true, sociologically. Spiritually is the biggest change, the most significant change. The change would be this, that I would have into my life the interests, the passions, the needs, the mentality of other human beings closer to me than any parishioner, anybody confided to my care spiritually. I am going to be diverted at least therefore from it. And my judgment is going to be molded by the people I live with, namely my wife and my children and their in-laws. You change the whole equation immediately. You change this man from being somebody totally dedicated to the people, in principle, of whom he is the parish priest, to somebody who is there fulfilling a job in charge of the plant. And that's a different thing completely, and wipes out the relationship that the church has established between the parishioners and the pastor itself. It doesn't work, we have found. It just doesn't work.
Now, while we're on the subject of the priesthood, an issue that is very high in many people's minds is that although there is a shortage of priests, there also are a number of very good men who are priests. But it seems like there is a persecution of these priests.
Yes, there is. There is. Listen, let me give you a personal anecdote in this matter. I, at the present moment, am in contact and in close correspondence with 23 priests in these United States, all of whom have been suspended by their bishops. By the way, they haven't offended sexually, they haven't stolen money, they're very zealous, they want to say Mass, they want to hold Stations of the Cross, they want to hold exposition of the Blessed Sacrament, they want to organize pilgrimages to Fatima. They, in other words, want to reproduce traditional Catholic devotional practices. The bishop doesn't want that. And these bishops, 4 bishops mainly, have insisted that if these men will not submit to psychological training and rehabilitation, because they must be rehabilitated, they say, then they will not give them any work. And the tactic always has been to give the man, for instance, his insurance money, his insurance, his health insurance, let him have $750 a month for about a year, and then if he hasn't changed, if he hasn't submitted and gone to the institute to be remodeled psychologically, they terminate him and they say, see you gone on Monday, Father. We don't need you any longer. And these are dioceses that lack priests. That is what is being done. And number 2, then, there's the fact that in many dioceses, at least anyway I can count many, the bishop now allows women can't celebrate with priests. To get the idea of a priest, a woman being on the altar. And they allow their nuns, who are on the television and radio, advocate the ordination of women and the marriage of priests. So there's definite bias against priests in many bishops' minds. They just don't want it. And they have said so openly. There was a meeting there last year in South Bend, Indiana, where many retired bishops said, it's about time the Pope ordained women. It's about time the Pope permitted the marriage of priests. So the bias against the priesthood is large. And, you know, Bernard, when you reflect on it, the bias against priesthood is due to a lack of devotion to Our Lady. Because if you think that a priest shouldn't be separate from the people in this matter of celibacy, if you think he should be like ordinary men, then you've lost the idea of what her son was like. He was completely dedicated to his work. He was celibate in a way which none of us can be on account of his being God and being Jesus, the Son of God, and on account of his extraordinary humanity that God gave him when he was born. And he was the son of Mary, a virgin, a celibate. If you do away with that idea, it means you have no devotion to Our Lady. It means you don't know what she was, what her son was, what her whole function was. And it means that you have a very funny idea of sexuality. You consider it either good or bad. And if you don't share it, you think it's bad, and that's twisted. If you do share it, then that's good. And that's the only way to be human. And this is non-Christian, it's non-Catholic, it's anti-Catholicism. And this, unfortunately, is a very rampant idea amongst our bishops and our priests too. They have very little idea of what celibacy means, and they're anti-priest. Now, there's also this, remember that nowadays the function of the priest has been reduced by the new practice, liturgical practices, which leads us into consideration of the Mass, which we'll deal with in a moment. But that makes out that the community is the important thing. The priest is not important. He's just a minister. Like he's in charge of the plant. Make sure that the heating is working and that the pews are clean and that there's some nice music and nice choirs and the roof doesn't leak. That's more or less the idea of a priest now. He's a manager of the plant.
And there's no reason why, let's say, a woman couldn't be the manager of that plant.
Of course not. In fact, they make far better managers. They're far more careful about these things. So why not? So the broadside attack on it is terrific and is organized and is going to go on. And bishops have caved in on this. And some of them want women priests now, and they certainly want married clergy. So the fight is going to go on this.
Have some of the bishops caved in the area of women priests?
Oh yes, they have. It's still a secret, but we know of one bishop, he's now dead, who ordained 32 women. At least he put them through the ceremony of ordination, and they say Mass every morning. And we know in Canada there are 3 groups at least of women who have their chalices and their vestments and say their Mass in private, waiting for the day that they will get permission and they will come out then as priests, priestesses. This has already happened, and it was inevitable. And I would be willing to take a small bet, not being a gambling man, that one day, out of the blue, some foolish bishop is going to stand up and say, I'm ordaining 5 women who have been studying theology. They're just as good as any man, and let Rome do what it can. And what can Rome do? I bet you it's going to happen. They're going to do that. And then some other bishop is going to say, I'm going to ordain married men and let them live as married men, and because I need priests. Which is the funny, twisted way of dealing, having dismissed good priests, having made it impossible to produce good priests, then turning around and going in the back door. It's satanic. It's the satanic attack on the church, because if they get rid of the priesthood, as we know it, the church is finished. The church, as a visible institution, the church is finished. There's no doubt about that. But they won't succeed in that. Just the battle is very tight, and we're not getting vocations.
To the priesthood is that of the Mass, and perhaps you can explain why the Mass and the priesthood are kind of bound together.
Yes, sir. It's a very important point, and above all, it's the heart of Catholicism. You probably have noticed from history already that when any power or any group wanted to destroy the Catholic Church, they made for the priests, and they abolished Mass. Once you did that, you removed Mass and the priesthood and the priests from Catholic life. And something always happened to populations which were deprived of that. Now, there's a very profound reason for that, and it is this, that of all the sacraments, the Blessed Eucharist is the central one, because it is the physical presence, literally, of God on this earth, of Christ. And that physical presence is only achieved by the offering of the sacrifice of the Mass. And therefore, if you can get rid of that, like Hitler did, like the British in Ireland did, like the French revolutionaries tried to do, like Russia tried to do, like they still try to do, whoever wants to destroy the church always tries to destroy the Mass. If they can do that, they're sure they're going to rid it. Bernard, there's a profound truth here, and it's this. Sanctifying grace. But by the way, if you get a temptation, if you see my wallet on the table, and I have $3,000 in it, and I'm not there, you have a temptation to take at least 2,000 for yourself, or 1,000. You can get what they call an actual grace, if you're good at that moment, if you want to avoid the temptation. That's what we call actual grace. Actual grace won't get you into heaven, though. You have to have a thing called sanctifying grace. Now, sanctifying grace is another grace completely. It's a permanent. The actual grace comes for the moment to remove your hand from my wallet and take your eyes away from my wife, or whatever you've been tempted to do. Sanctifying grace is something substantial that comes and resides in your soul. The first time you have sanctifying grace is at baptism. And you get that, and therefore you are a child of God, and original sin is wiped out, and you have grace in your soul. And by the way, without sanctifying grace, you can't get into heaven. Okay? Now, you only get sanctifying grace through the sacraments. And the chief sacrament for getting that for adults, after they're married or ordained or whatever, confirmed and baptized, is the Blessed Eucharist in the sacrifice of the Mass. So if you cut off the Mass as a source of sanctifying grace, you withdraw grace from the population. But without sanctifying grace, you can't avoid sin. In the long run, you can't avoid sin. And the light of baptism dies out in your mind, and you fall into error. And that's almost a history of what happened in the church since 1969, when they brought in the new form of the Mass. And I want to discuss the ins and outs of all that, because if there's any wound, deep wound, in the body of the church today, it is the destruction of the Mass, which was a deliberate thing, set up deliberately, planned deliberately, and now being carried forward deliberately. So the Mass is terribly important. In essence, let me say why it's important. It's this. You see, Christ died on Calvary, and we know that's the central act of history. All history climbed up to that, and from ever afterwards, history is only a fulfillment of that sacrifice, its fulfillment and its fruits in the history of, in the races of man. And that's really what's up today with the community of nations we spoke about in another interview, that community no longer shares the body and blood of the sacrificed lamb of Christ. Therefore they don't get sanctifying grace. Therefore what they do is not done in his name. Therefore it's not the rule of God, it's the rule of man alone, and that has no blessing. It's bound, as the Pope says, it will come to naught. It has to come to naught, because it's godless. It's not the rule of God. Blessed by the sacrifice of Calvary. Now, essentially, Catholics believe that any Mass you attend, any valid Mass, said by a valid priest, is a reenactment of Calvary. That doesn't mean it's a reproduction like we produce, say, the revolutionary career of George Washington in a play. No, it means that really, under the species of bread and wine, and on an altar created by man, with a priest dressed in vestments, and the presence of people in a church built by man, the sacrifice takes place again as 'twere. It is the reenactment of the real act of sacrifice, so that when you're present at the consecration of a Mass, you're present at the Calvary in a mystical way, but a real way. That's the doctrine. It's pure faith. There's no means of knowing that except through faith. No means of holding it except through faith. There's no means of living by it and profiting by it except by faith. It's pure faith. I remember I once had a Protestant lady friend when I was very young. I was 10. And she was asking me what I was being taught in catechism. And I said, well, I told her about Mass. And she said, Malachi, if I believed that, I would crawl all the way from my house. She lived 7 miles from the church, on my belly to the church every day, just to be present at it. Which was, to her Protestant, non-Catholic mind, was what would be fitting if God himself was reenacting his crucifixion. Really, you can be present at it mystically, but really, that was the effect of her mind. She didn't believe. Later on, she did. She joined the Catholic Church and died in the Catholic faith. Now, that's the importance of the faith. And the attack of Satan on the church today centered on the Mass. And wiping out the Mass, damaging the Mass, which he has done through his minions, he has damaged the priesthood. And damaging both of those, because the priesthood's main weapon is Mass. Say, the definition of a priest, you often hear, what's a priest? Well, he's somebody who is the preacher of the word, and he manages the affairs of the local church. Well, that is nonsense. A priest is primarily an offerer of sacrifice. That's his primary function.
And in the new Mass, the sacrificial aspects of that Mass have largely been removed.
Oh, they've been removed. They've been removed deliberately because, as you know, the people who composed the Mass originally were 6 Protestants and 2 Catholics, under the direction of a Freemason called Annibale Bonini, who, as we know, was a Mason, a Freemason. He was an archbishop, and he had lost his faith. And he was the originator of it. And the first version of the Mass, which he drew up for Pope Paul VI, you know what happened is, he gave it to Paul VI, and 2 cardinals, Ottaviani and Bacci, went to Pope Paul VI and said, Your Holiness, if you publish this Mass, we're going to declare you a heretic. They said that. So Paul VI withdrew it, and he made some small changes in it, and hence we have the Nos Ordo. Now, that was the beginning of the attack on the Mass. I remember receiving from my brother in the mail from Ireland a Missale Romano, a Roman missal, all burnt at the edges. And he said, when I came home today, they were burning the missals and the pews and the confessionals and breaking the statues in the local church, the parish church where we all went as kids. And he said, I saved this as a memento. The destruction reeked, and you have now got antique shops and shops selling antiques and antiquities in New York. You can buy a chalice, you can buy a tabernacle, you can buy a ciborium, you can buy a confessional, you can buy pews, you can buy vestments, you can even buy pyxis where they carry the blessed sacrament to the sick person. These are all things now have been thrown out. And you can see all the priest names. John L. Cullen was the last priest. I bought that chalice and had it reconsecrated by the bishop here. The destruction was terrible. Before descending to it, the details of it, because there are a few points there which Catholics should know. Bernard, it's extraordinary to think that if I, a priest, went to the local church here wearing Bermuda shorts and a t-shirt with I love the world or I love Wales on it, and I wore a golf cap and had 2 parrots on my shoulders and was accompanied by 2 nuns in leotards and proceeded to have a new mass, I would be called creative. If I went there dressed in square Roman vestments and start off at the foot of the altar saying Introibor altare Dei, they would call the police. There is a horror of the Mass. There is a fear of it. There is a horror of it, a dislike of it. I have met very reverend Monsignore of the old school. And I've said to them, by the way, what do you think now of the traditional Mass compared to the Novus Ordo, which your reverence says every morning? And they've said to me, I don't care about it. I don't want to see that thing again. They've lost all appreciation of it. Then we asked them, well, what about giving the alternative to those who want? They said, no, it's bad for them. We don't want that. There is a horror of the Mass, and it's almost satanic. It's a dislike, an intense dislike of the Roman Mass as it was traditionally known. And when I point out to them the defects of the Novus Ordo, which I want to talk about now to you, they shuck them off and say, no, it's okay. It's okay. The Pope did away with the Mass anyway.
Let's talk about both points that you've mentioned. Let's look now at the defects of the new Mass.
Well, the defects are mainly this. The central defect is this. Let me illustrate before I give you the main thing. If I'm baptizing you, and I say, I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, amen. Is that baptism valid? No. Do you know why?
Why?
I've changed the words of Christ. It's invalid. I put in the word amen. Christ didn't say that. You can't change the form of the sacrament. Only 2 sacraments did Christ give us the words of institution. Baptism in Mark and the Blessed Eucharist, the Mass. And the words he used are the words we must use. In fact, we must to such a degree use them that Trent said that anybody who changes those words is anathema. Is anathema. Anathema means that you're out of the church. It means you're an apostate. It means you're condemned by the council of the church, by the church itself. Well, as you know, the new Mass has changed the essential words about the consecration of the chalice. Christ said, this is the chalice of my blood, which shall be shed for you and for many unto the remission of sins. But the operative words are for many. He didn't say for all. Now, in the Novus Ordo, the ICEL, the International Council of the English Liturgy, changed the word all, changed the word many to all. And the excuse they gave was a lie. They said that the word in Aramaic for all and for many is the same word. And therefore when Christ said for many, he meant for all. If he said for all, he meant for many. So it doesn't matter. Now, I'm an Aramaic scholar and a Hebrew scholar. There are 2 words for all in Hebrew and 2 words for all in Aramaic. And there are 2 words for many in Hebrew and 2 words for many in Hebrew and in Aramaic. So Christ didn't say for many, for all, he said for many, for multis. And that's an important point which you must remember. Now that changing it, that invalidates the consecration of the chalice. It's simply the wine remains wine. It doesn't become the blood of Christ. And if the wine is not consecrated, there is no sacrifice. According to the dogma of the church, there must be body and blood. There must be bread and wine consecrated to consummate the sacrifice of Christ on the cross. It must represent his body and his blood. Therefore there's no sacrifice. Therefore there's no Mass. If there's no Mass, there's no sanctifying grace. And the consecration of the bread is illicit. It's valid but illicit. In fact, some theologians think the bread is not consecrated at all if the wine is not consecrated. That's what happens. So that if you say that, in the spirit of Luther, who made it, and most of them do, you haven't said Mass. Now, Bernard, if you want to know in a shortcut way what has happened in the church, why there are no vocations, why families are falling to pieces, why a majority of Catholics in this North American continent hold that abortion laws are all right and contraception is all right, and why a majority hold that homosexuality is a valid way of life, and why they're not against euthanasia, and why they don't mind fetal experimentation, if you want to know that, just think on the fact that grace is withdrawn. Without sanctifying grace, you can't resist temptation. Now, there's another point to it. If I steal your money, it's an act of stealing. I violate one of the 10 Commandments. But there's more than that. It's not merely the sin of stealing. There's guilt on my soul for that, with the punishment due to it. That's not the only thing that happens to me. I also lose grace. And losing grace, I lose light. I lose faith. And if I commit sufficient sins of stealing, I lose my faith totally. And that's with any major sin. Now, if you go on not getting sanctifying grace, and constantly doing the wrong thing, not having the sacrifice of the Mass, and many churches, many dioceses have no Masses at all. They've got this charade of a Mass. In that case, there's no sanctifying grace, and therefore I lose my light, and the diocese loses its supernatural light. And they all go in various directions, pushed by Satan, or pushed by error, pushed by bad judgment, pushed by people with no faith. That's the terrible devastation of the church. You want to know what has happened to us really? That's why faith has been withdrawn. We no longer have sanctifying grace. There's worse than that. In order for there to be a real Mass, the priest must be validly ordained. Must be a real priest. No matter how you want to say Mass, if you're not validly ordained, you can't consecrate the bread and the wine. We know several bishops who have no intention of creating priests. And therefore, when they ordain people, they're not ordaining them to be priests. And therefore, the priest can't offer Mass. We have certain cases of certain bishops we suspect have never been ordained, and therefore they're not consecrated. They're not Christians. They're not priests. And that means, therefore, the whole thing, the whole shebang is invalid. And therefore, what Our Lady said, that a period of unfaith would come, and the church would suffer, and the smoke of Satan would envelop the church right up to the altar and the sanctuary, is coming true by the machinations of men and the machinations of the devil. That's the difficulty with the Novus Ordo. Now, I know priests in this diocese who are in parishes, and if they said anything but the words of the Novus Ordo, they would be punished. So what they say is, they say for all out loud, and under their breath, they say, I mean for many, to make sure it's consecrated. So this is a very dire situation. What is frustrating and painful is that so many good priests who really want to do good don't understand this. They haven't got the light. They think it's valid. And when you argue with them about the change of Christ's words, they were never taught that in the seminary. They no longer learned that. They were taught, this is what you say. They were also told a further lie. They were told that the Pope changed the Mass, that he abrogated, that he abolished the Mass. And bishops say that. That's a lie, directly. Paul VI never forbade the Mass, never wiped it out. By the way, he couldn't if he tried, but he didn't. And the idea that Rome forbade them to say the Mass, that is a lie too. But it's fomented. I heard bishops say that. I've seen it in their pastoral letters. I've seen it in parish priests' sermons.
Let's look at the present Pope. Has Pope John Paul II forbade the Mass?
No, never. No. But what has happened, John Paul II, is this. He walked into a Vatican which was thoroughly paganized and Protestantized, and he finds that he cannot change them. He cannot change the liturgy back. He can't. He just can't. He's one man, and you see, the Vatican works through law, through fixed legal procedures, canonical legal procedures. There are people in control there who refuse or frustrate him. He can't change it. Now he himself, when he says Mass in Latin, says for many. When he says Mass in the vernacular, he says for all. And one wonders how he squares that away. I'm sure he does it with a mental reservation or something. Otherwise there is no Mass, because the words of Christ are changed. That's the big difficulty with the Mass. The second big difficulty is this, that apart from the words of consecration, the priest must have the intention of offering the sacrifice of Calvary. Now, I have questioned very delicately and very discreetly young priests and middle-aged priests, priests in 35 and 45 and 55, they have no idea of offering a sacrifice. They do what they call, we offer the Eucharist, or we celebrate the Eucharist. And when you ask them what celebrating the Eucharist means, it's very simple. All of them put it in different ways, but it comes down to this. We gather together. Christ said, whenever 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am. The community is there. The community's faith brings Christ down. The idea of the consecration of the bread and the wine is out. And I've often said to them, look, is the wine the blood of Christ? They say, yes, you can call it that if you want to. As if it wasn't a dogmatic fact. You have to swear that on an oath, otherwise you're a modernist and you're out of the church. So that has been destroyed. That has been destroyed.
Let's look now at another point. I think this discussion can only be understood in the light that the people who have constructed and are currently promoting the new Mass have a different ecclesiology.
Yes, they have, and it's a very vital thing.
Now, what is ecclesiology? Perhaps
I'll
you
tell
should
you,
define that.
ecclesiology is this. If somebody says, my ecclesiology is this, that means he's going to give you his concept of the church, what the church is, okay? Now, up to Vatican II, the regnant, the dominant, the official view of the church, by the way, when you speak about ecclesiology, you're always speaking about the external church, the visible church, composed of priests, bishops, cardinals, nuns, etc. Now, your ecclesiology, the regnant and the dominant concept of the church was, it was a hierarchy. And the bishops were pastors, successors of the apostles, and they were united by oath and by faith with the Pope, who was Peter, and who was not merely the chairman of the board, he was the authority. And priests were in a hierarchy of order and command and zeal and faith. That was the concept. And therefore the Mass was central because the priests celebrated Mass, and that Mass affected the entire body because it was the celebration of the mystical body of Christ. The new ecclesiology is different. The new ecclesiology says, no, the church is not that. The church is the people of God. They have all the power. And 'tis they effect the consecration, 'tis they effect the Mass, the coming of our Lord among us. And it means that all people are involved in it, not merely Catholics or Christians, but Buddhists and Muslims and Hindus and Lutherans and Presbyterians and Mormons. Everybody's included in it because salvation is for all men and all men are saved. Whereas the dogmatic teaching of the church is that that hierarchic church represents a remnant. Not all will be saved. Not all men will be saved. According to Christ's words, which is shed for you and for many, not for all, because not all men are saved. The new doctrine, the new ecclesiology, includes the idea that everybody is saved. And all you have to do is be faithful to your conscience, even if you are a whale God adorer, or a Mormon, or a Muslim, or a Jew. As a good Jew, as a good Mormon, as a good Presbyterian, you can be saved, just as much as a Catholic. Of course, the question arises then, why be a Catholic? Why not be a Mormon? Why not stay a Mormon? Why convert? Why have missions? Why have evangelists? Why have missionary orders? There's no point. Leave them alone. In their Islam, in their Buddhism, in their Mormonism, in their Presbyterianism. Now, the difficulty with that ecclesiology is that it's not traditional. No pope before this pope would have recognized it. No pope. They would have condemned it immediately. The church is a hierarchical body composed of apostles, the bishops, and Peter, the Pope. That was the original one. And it is a strict body saving a remnant out of humanity. And the essence of it is that it's a hierarchy. That is, there's dignity and honor, and at the very bottom there's just faithfulness and zeal and attachment to the church. That's all. Now, you know, it's very striking that when the American bishops gave their instructions how to apply the Novus Ordo, they said that when the priest turns around to the people and says, when I'm going to give you Holy Communion in the Novus Ordo, they said the words he uses are the body of Christ. He must not say this is the body of Christ. Why? If they believed it was the body of Christ, why not say this is the body of Christ? No, you're forbidden to say that. because it isn't the body of Christ in that sense. What they're saying is this bread represents the whole community and Christ put in one bowl. So you just say the body of Christ. You don't say this is the body of Christ, because that's not the church. That's the new ecclesiology. And that's why there's now a diminution of emphasis on why have a priest? Why not have the community? The community can consecrate. It can appoint a minister or a presider of the ceremony. It can be rotated, in fact. It could be done by votes. But you happen to have a priesthood. What are consecrated hands? Just wash your hands, old boy. It's just as good as anybody else. In fact, the plumber's hands might be cleaner than yours, even if you're a doctor or a lawyer or a broker. The priesthood has no meaning. And then why not have a woman to do that? A woman is just as good as a man. She can keep a plant going. She can have clean hands too. So why not have a woman? There's no difficulty. Once you kill the Mass, you kill the priesthood, kill the idea of celibacy, kill the idea of the male priesthood, kill the idea of Christ the eternal priest. You change the whole ecclesiology.
Now let's stop and talk about another point about this ecclesiology. I've had discussions with prominent modern liturgists, and one of them told me that the whole central point of this discussion about the Mass is that of ecclesiology. He said, you have to bring in a new Mass because now the ecclesiology and our whole view of the church and the sacred has changed.
That is the politest and the clearest expression of modernism I've ever heard. Because you see, the church never changes a dogma. It can't. It can't say, which they're saying nowadays, original sin has changed now. They have changed the idea of original sin. You can't change the dogmatic idea. The traditional and the obligatory note about the Mass is that it is the sacrifice of Calvary reenacted really on the altar at the hands of a consecrated priest who has the faculty given him by ordination to do so, to function in loco Christi, in the place of Christ. He's alter Christus at that moment. He's another Christ functioning for him because of the seal of priesthood set on his soul by God at ordination. If you now say, well, we've changed all that. Now we say that it's really the priesthood of the people. This is a grand idea. By the way, it's much older than the Roman Catholic Church. It has been in pagan religions, the priesthood of the people. But it's not Catholic, and it's not dogmatic. It's not in Trent. It was condemned in Trent. It's a heresy. And that means the man who says that, who has said that to you, any man who holds that, is in a state which I want to discuss with you before the end of this tape, or the end of this interview, apostasy. He's an apostate. He may not know it, but that doesn't matter. Usually, you know, if you're a very cultured gentleman, and you're clean, and you eat well, and you're conventionally well-behaved, if you become a barbarian, you don't know you've become a barbarian, otherwise you'd change back. Similarly, if you lose your faith, if you become an apostate, you don't know you've lost it, otherwise you'd run like the devil to get it back. So you can lose your faith, and then the curse is God doesn't let you know you've lost it. You think it's okay, you think the other guy is stupid. So that man is not a Catholic any longer, he's apostatic. In fact, many bishops and many priests are apostates. The question we have down here in the States, whenever we've come across a new bishop or a new priest, is he Catholic? We always ask that question. We know what we mean by it. We mean somebody who knows what the Mass is, has devotion to Our Lady, is devoted to the Holy Father, prays, and goes to Mass and Communion at least once a week, and confession at least once a year, fulfills the laws of the Church. We haven't got that type of Catholic in many places nowadays. So that's what the difficulty is with that man who said the new ecclesiology. A new ecclesiology means changing the nature of the Church. Now, the nature of the Church has been defined by tradition unchangeably. You can't change it. And he has changed it for his own benefit. And the bishops have taken up that idea too. He's ignorant.
Now, suppose that I am a good layman, I am a good priest. Why should I be concerned about this issue?
You should be concerned about it if you're a good layman, because you depend utterly on the priest being validly ordained and validly absolving you from sins in confessional and validly consecrating the bread and wine at Mass, because otherwise, how are you to have the body and blood of Christ? Without that, you're not going to get sanctifying grace. You won't really be saved, or with difficulty you'll be saved. If he doesn't do those things, you're high and dry. You're high and dry. You have no source of grace. Then you must say a rosary and plead with God and try and get a priest who does consecrate and hear a valid Mass once in your lifetime at least. Many people are in that position today. They drive 60 or 70 miles once a month to get a valid Mass. And then they drive 200 miles to get their children confirmed validly, because confirmation is another sacrament that's fallen by the wayside, as well as confession. For the priest, it's very important, because if the priest thinks that he's the manager of a plant, that he's presiding at a communal meal where the community is what's important and not him, it means that he no longer identifies with Christ, the high priest. It means he no longer identifies what he's doing with Calvary. It means he doesn't believe it's Calvary all over again, or in its original reality. He doesn't believe that. In fact, he doesn't believe, period. And if he doesn't believe, my friend, oh, that's it. Without that, then he's an apostate. He's an apostate. And we must touch on this question of apostasy, because there is a lot of what we call immanent apostasy today. It's not yet external, but it's there, it's everywhere, apostasy. So that's what's wrong. If they haven't got a right idea of what Mass is, and if they don't be present at a correct Mass, a valid Mass, then I'm afraid they suffer all those ills. And that's what's happening in the Church. And the most pathetic thing and the most frightening thing for me is to come across whole parishes where the whole parish has indulged in the Novus Ordo under the leadership of the parish priest, under the orders of the bishop. Their catechisms reflect this, their religious books reflect this, the sermons they hear reflect this. They never hear again about the sacrifice in Calvary. Not really. They don't believe in it because they don't know it any longer. The children never heard about it. And they don't know the catechism, and they don't know the basic dogma or doctrine. They're not Catholic any longer. They don't know it, but they're not Catholic. They're not Catholic any longer. That's the devastation of Christ's Church. Now, what's going to happen to those people? Bernard, we were created as a race collectively in Adam and Eve, but we will be judged individually. And there's always a point when the grace of the Holy Ghost tells you something is wrong, tells you to inquire, inspires you to seek. Most people don't. Well, that's their fault, and they will have to answer to Christ for having done that. And they have to answer to Christ for the sins and omissions and offenses and sacrileges and lukewarmness of which they have been guilty all their lives, because they are responsible for it. It's a terrible curse. And if you ask me what is really the fundamental cause of the descent of the Church into shambles, it is the disruption and the destruction of the Mass. And that's a pity. And will be much more poignantly felt in the next 10 years, because, I would be willing to make a second bet with you, not being a gambling man, that within about 10 years, the non-believers will be in possession of the Church, and the believers will be outside and can't get in, because they find it utterly alien to them, and it is alien to them. It's not Catholic any longer. And that's happening at the present moment. Large droves of people are deserting the Church and leaving it to go. So this is the pathos and the pity and the terrible condition of the Church today.
Okay, I know many good Catholics who have been attending the Novus Ordo over the years, and yet they've kept to the faith as best as they can. Why should these people be concerned about the issue of the Mass?
Well, Bernard, that's a very, very poignant question. I'll tell you why. Many people don't know it, but we're only in the second stage of the liturgical reform inaugurated by those who took a hold of the Vatican Council when it was ended, took hold of its documents and twisted them the way they wanted them to go. We're rapidly approaching the third stage, and one's informants about what the third stage is like bring home the horrible lesson that if you think there's a difference between the Novus Ordo and the traditional Mass, wait until you see the third stage. You won't recognize it at all. It's so different. Now, people who will be reared in the last stages of the second stage and then in the final third stage, and those who also support that, should remember one thing. There is no way they will ever know what the central act of worship of the Roman Catholic Church was meant to say, meant to do, meant to signify, unless they know the traditional Mass. And those who are very sincere in favor of the Novus Ordo, who really believe it's okay, in spite of the fact that they've violated what Trent said, and that they're holding something that Trent called anathema, and that they've changed the words of Christ and still think it's valid, in spite of all that, who are sincere about it and still say it's all right because the Pope says to do it, and the parish priest says to do it, and the bishop says to do it, and the ICEL, the International Council of the English Liturgy says to do it, and all the liturgists in the majority say to do it, they should remember one thing, that the further away you get from the traditional Mass, which dates from the time of the earliest popes, and which embodies all the traditions of the Church about Christ's sacrifice and the central act of redemption, the further you get away from that, the less you will know about that central act of sacrifice. And if the day comes that the words of consecration are further modified, and that no idea of the sacrifice enters the Mass, and that the role of the people is emphasized to completely obscure the function of the priest, even if they don't make priesthood shared by women, which would be a further depredation of the original idea of the Mass, then in that case, they will not know what the Mass means. They will not know that it is a reenactment of the sacrifice of Calvary. They will not know the fact that physicality of Jesus is present in his body and blood, really physically present. At the present moment, it's a symbol. They don't hold transubstantiation. They have transmogrified all that into some sort of new presence of what amounts to holy bread and holy wine. And therefore, if this goes through, then there will be no hope for them ever to know what the Mass was and is supposed to be in its kernel. But the only hope is this, that I don't think Our Lady is going to let the desecration of the Mass go much further than the third stage. I think at that stage, by that time, the Church will be so shot, so much in shambles, that it will be time for her to inaugurate the beginning of a new era. But by that time, Bernard, many souls will be lost. Many idolatrous acts will have been performed, because remember, if you receive bread, ordinary bread, and think it's the body of Christ and adore it, you're committing material idolatry. And the person who made you do that is guilty of formal idolatry, because he's serving Satan. So a lot of things will have happened. But there is a danger that most liturgists you meet at that time, young men and young women, because there are women liturgists now, not doing anything about the Mass, in its history, the tradition, what it means, not doing the dogma of the Church, won't know what the Mass is at all. And therefore we will be sliding into something worse than what the Protestants have. Because some of the Protestants have a more liturgically correct form of the Mass, although their Masses are invalid because they're not ordained. They're not priests, and you must be ordained to say Mass properly and consecrate the bread and wine. That's the danger of this third degree. But you must remember, though, Bernard, that what we experience is the hatred of the Mass. The hatred. And the higher you go, sometimes the worse it is. You have Bishop Keith Simons, for instance, of the Diocese of Pensacola, Tallahassee, down in Florida. Keith Simons is a bishop, recently appointed. He refers to priests who say the traditional Mass as, get this, and shiver slightly, as slaughterhouse priests. Because the idea of having blood is so repellent. It's only in a slaughterhouse.
It doesn't fit in with our modern society, and that's
right.
true of the whole old Mass.
That's right. Slaughterhouse priests. In other words, the idea of, he's throwing contempt on the idea of Christ's blood. They don't believe Christ's blood is present. You must believe the wine is his blood. Just as you must believe the wafer, the bread is his flesh. You must believe that against the testimony of your senses. Otherwise you're not Catholic. That's been diminished down to sacred symbols of the community's togetherness. Well, brother, I have something to tell you. I don't want togetherness with anybody human. I want it together with Christ. And if I'm going to be presented with bread which signifies my togetherness with you or anybody else, oh, come on. I can play football with you, have a boxing match, I can marry your daughter, or whatever. That sort of togetherness. But this sort of togetherness in liturgy, I don't want it at all. I want togetherness with Christ my Savior, because I know in that way I'll be saved. But the corruption has gone very, very high, very high. And only Our Lady and Christ can really cure us now, because it's gone so far that the Novus Ordo is proscribed. The present Pope has done his best with an indult and with Ecclesia Dei, this organization, to make it available. And even there, he made remarks which can't be accepted really as they are. He said that for those who still are attached to the old way, as if, we had an ancient habit we couldn't get rid of, and we better satisfy these people, really, in parentheses, until they die out. This is not going to die out. And it's not an ancient habit we're just attached to, like a bad habit of smoking or drinking. It is a firm belief and knowledge that the dogma of the Church is tied up inextricably with the Mass, which cannot be abrogated or destroyed by any pope, which will last forever.
Now let's go on to an issue which is related to that of the Mass, and especially that of the Ecclesia Day Commission and the Indult, and that is that of Archbishop Lefebvre's apostolate. Now, this was founded, it's interesting that we've been discussing the priesthood and the Mass, because Archbishop Lefebvre's apostolate has been founded basically on the idea of defending the priesthood and the Mass.
That's right. That's
what
the
are your
center.
views on the Archbishop Lefebvre issue?
Well, I must tell you, the older I get, every day I bless the Lord for having given us Archbishop Lefebvre. Because no matter what defects or excesses there may be in other way in the Society of Pius X, the society he founded, the institute he founded, there is this one thing. They have ensured that the Church has a small but definite supply of validly ordained priests who say valid masses and hear valid confessions. And that, for me, is a boon from the hand of God. This can't be the work of Satan. Satan doesn't do that. It's cutting off his nose to spite his face. So I thank God for Marcel Lefebvre. And I think that in the providence of God, he was raised up after the Vatican Council just to counteract in a very sharp and abrupt and jolting way the onward corruption of the Church in a central act of worship. So I think that he's a blessing. I think he was sent by God, quite frankly.
I think that another benefit that Archbishop Lefebvre has provided is that it puts pressure on the authorities to make concessions to good priests within dioceses.
Insofar as they make concessions, it's because of Marcel Lefebvre, and it's because he's there as an alternative. There's also this. As long as people are saying the Mass validly, as long as there are good priests who do so and good confession, then the truth is bound to prevail finally. And I don't know, I can't tell you, because there are too many of them, how many priests have passed through my hands who said the Novus Ordo for quite a while, since it was published, because they were obedient priests, and suddenly came to the conclusion that they'd better switch and go back to what they used to say, or what they never said. Some of them are young priests that never knew the traditional Mass. And uniformly, immediately, everything has changed in them. Their notion of the Church, their notion of zeal, their notion of devotion to Jesus, their personal relationship with him. One man said to me, he said, now I know I am united with him physically and spiritually every morning. I didn't believe that, he said. I didn't believe that. So the effect of Marcel Lefebvre is huge. And remember that God writes straight with crooked lines. It's an old Spanish proverb. And I don't think anybody could have shaken up the satanic presence in the Church as much as Marcel Lefebvre. Nobody could have done it by direct opposition and by persevering. And then with God's blessing, because, you know, he's economically viable. They can't liquidate him. He, in numbers, he's growing. So he's independent of them as regards the material things. So they can't put screws on him, as we say in this country. He's independent economically, and in numbers he gets his own, he's building his own seminaries, his own schools, his own convents. So God has given him those blessings. Now it remains to be seen what's going to happen to him what's going to happen to the institute when he dies, and what God does with it. And I'm quite certain God is going to bless it and direct it in various ways. But by that time there may be a change in the Church.
Now let's move on to another subject that played a very large role in your recent book, The Keys of This Blood. And that is the issue of the papacy. Because that whole teaching is also one, in addition to that of the priesthood and the Mass, which the liberals are trying to undermine.
Yeah. The idea, you see, the idea of the papacy, the idea of a pope, the idea of a successor to Peter, with Peter's authority, with the final vote on any subject, and endowed with infallibility under certain stringent circumstances. That is when he's teaching dogma or morals for the whole Church, and he's doing it ex officio, ex cathedra, as we say.
Let's briefly go over this whole teaching of the Church called infallibility.
Yeah.
Many Catholics and also many Protestants are confused about this teaching.
Sure they are.
When does infallibility apply?
Only when, first of all, he says so. He must say, I am speaking for the whole Church, number one. I, the Pope, I'm speaking for the whole Church. I'm speaking about a dogma or a moral issue concerning the whole Church, and I'm imposing it with the authority of Peter. Those four elements must be there. If he does that, it's obligatory to accept it. If you want to be Catholic, that's infallibility. If he omits any of those, if he makes a particular judgment for a particular country, he makes a prudential judgment about a war, he condemns a bishop or a priest, normally there's a thing called normal infallibility. His will must be respected. He's supposed to have the blessing of God, but he can make a mistake. And of course, if he predicts the weather tomorrow, there's no need to listen to him. It's nothing to do with that. It has to do always with the basic dogma of morals that concerns the whole Church. It's not, for instance, the question of polygamy in Africa. That doesn't apply to us in the States or apply to a lot of the Church. It must be a universal thing. And it must be, he must state that I now ex cathedra speak that way with the authority of Peter. That cannot be resisted by anybody. That's the essence of the papacy as a spiritual authority.
Could you give an example of where this power of infallibility was used?
Yeah, and in 1954, when the Pius XII decreed that Our Lady had been assumed body and soul into heaven at the end of her mortal life. He didn't say she died. He didn't say she was taken alive. He just said at the end of her mortal life on this earth, she was assumed body and soul into heaven. That's purely and simply an exercise in infallibility. He said, we ex authoritate Petri, from the authority of Peter, apostoli, there the apostle, define and declare that Our Lady at the end of her mortal life was assumed body and soul into heaven. After that, the whole question was closed. It is a dogma. Now, a lot of mud and obloquy has been thrown on that since, and I know bishops don't believe that. They say, well, he was just, Pastor was very devoted to Our Lady, and he had a lot of Marian worshippers and idolaters around him that persuaded him to do this. This is because it's the un-Catholic mind is talking. Another one would have been the decree of infallibility of the Pope issued by the Council, the First Vatican Council, where it declared that the Pope was infallible and was independent of any council or any bishop. And that whereas all the bishops owed him allegiance, he owed allegiance to nobody. He needn't do what anybody says. They have to do what he says. They have to agree with what he says. Now, the infallibility of the Pope, though, that's his extraordinary infallibility. His ordinary infallibility, infallibilitas ordinaria, as they call it in theology, that extends to normal things. If the Pope says masturbation is wrong, he's exercising infallibility. If he says that in vitro fertilization is wrong, it's his normal infallibility, unless he says it's extraordinary, unless he says this is for the whole Church, which he normally doesn't do. He simply decrees. If he says don't have altar girls, that's his infallible indication what you should do. Then if you violate that, you violate his infallibility, his ordinary infallibility. He has a normal infallibility guaranteed him in the normal trend of his duties, in other words, unless it's egregiously wrong. You know, if he says that the Gulf War is a very good war because it's going to assure the flow of oil or something, which no Pope would do. But I mean, take an example like that. Then you could say, well, hold on a moment. So it's a very definite thing, and he hasn't exercised it an awful lot. When Pope Pius XII excommunicated all members of the Italian Communist Party in 1949, he left the door open for it to be reinterpreted. He didn't make an infallible statement. He said it was his will and his opinion and judgment. So he didn't make it infallible.
Now let's take a look at how the liberals are trying to undermine the Church's teaching on the papacy.
Well, the way they're trying to undermine it is very intelligent. It's very intelligent. They don't attack the Pope directly. Nobody attacks the Pope. In fact, they send him money every year from Peter's pence, and they go over and pay their visits as bishops there. They go over there ad limina visit. Every 5 years, every bishop must go and see the Pope and get a blessing and tell him how his diocese is going. That's all right. They do all that. And when they meet him, they kiss his ring, and they give him obeisance, and he is, after all, the head of a very venerable institution. But whenever he gives an order, they violate it. Or if they want to do something, they ask him, may they do it? He forbids it. They go ahead and do it. At the end of 3 years, they say, Holy Father, this is the custom, we've got to permit it. And the Holy Father generally says, okay, go ahead and do it, because he can't change them. That's number one. Number two, they hope, when this Pope dies, to elect a liberal Pope who will opt out. You see, their whole pressure with John Paul II is to make sure he never issues an infallible statement. Look, let me tell you the tactic there, which is very intelligent. Once upon a time when I was young, perhaps you remember, they carried the Pope around in a portable chair, the sedia gestatoria, and he was flanked by two huge fans made of ostrich feathers with marvelous silver emboss. At the present moment, that sedia gestatoria and the two ostrich feathers, you know where they are, the fans? In the cellars, in the museum. They're now relics. And they point to them and say, well, we used to do this once upon a time. You know, it's one of these old habits the church had and has dropped it since. They want to make papal authority the same thing. And what they do is, what they did with the sedia gestatoria, how do you make a thing a relic? You don't use it. You put it in storage. You allow it to fall into desuetude, into obsolescence. And they are making sure the Pope never makes a statement which is observed, so that he's not exercising papal authority, so that it falls into desuetude and obsolescence. And people remember the days the Pope used to speak out authoritatively. He doesn't do it any longer. Therefore, we're not going to do it anymore, because it was an old habit which we now know doesn't agree with the modern world. That's the present idea. Put the pressure on him never to issue a statement that they must obey. And if he issues a statement, disobey it. And then say, well, we've done this, and this is the habit locally, and we're going to go on doing it. And generally the Pope would say, go ahead.
And can you have authentic Catholicism without the traditional teaching on the papacy?
No, you can't. I'll tell you why you can't have a traditional Catholicism. Why? The church, the visible church is as dead as a doornail without the Pope. Once you get rid of the Pope, the papal position, you destroy the office of Peter. And only to Peter did Christ say, you are Peter. Upon this rock, I will build my church, and I will give you the power of the keys of the kingdom of heaven, Peter. And what sins you loose on earth, they're loosed in heaven. What sins you tie on earth, they're tied in heaven. And then when he was speaking with him, the last conversation he had with Peter on the shores of Lake Galilee, he said to Peter, feed my lambs and feed my sheep, Peter. He said it 3 times to him. He gave him this commission. And the history of Peter, as we know it, and we know an awful lot about it, from then on was that he always made the final decision. Sometimes they had to push him. Paul had to push him for the baptism of Gentiles, but he pushed him. But Peter had to make that decision. And similarly to all the churches always consulted the Pope, Roman Pope, because finally that was the man who had the tradition. He knew what Christ wanted. They would have their squabbles and fight amongst each other, resist the Pope at certain points. Then they'd say, well, what should we believe? And he'd say, this. And then the famous phrase was, Roma locuta est, Roma spoken, causa finita est, that the whole discussion is over. Now, if we get rid of that, then we're into an incorporated organization, much like the Anglican Church, where there's a head, but he's an honorary head, and he's a decent fella, and he doesn't exercise any authority over anybody. He is a sign of cohesion, like the Queen of England, who reigns but doesn't govern. And above all, he hasn't got the gift of infallibility, because he's not the Pope. He's not Peter. There must be Peter. And wherever Peter is, ubi Petrus est, ibi ecclesia, is the old saying. Wherever Peter is, there's the church. That's the difficulty with all those who insist that they're Catholics and don't obey the Pope, have left the church as apostates. They're not in the church any longer. They've apostatized. They don't belong to Peter any longer. And therefore, if they die, they will go to hell with that sin on their soul. The pressure on John Paul II is going to be very heavy because, as you know, he's approaching his 75th year. John Paul II is a bishop. He's Bishop of Rome. And the pressure on him now is to resign because he's tired. That's a new world. And he's done his great work, Holy Father, but now yield the reins to a younger man. And they hope to get him to resign because at the present moment, if you look at those who would elect the Pope in the next conclave, most of them would elect a liberal Pope who would not want to be Pope, who would consent to obsolescence and be chairman of the board. A position to which Paul VI came very near, by the way, just being chairman of the board and having the bishops do what they like, while he did nothing but wring his hands. That is the danger. And by the way, a fearsome thing for Catholics is the following, that according to some revelations made to private people, but in general authenticated by the Church, one of the horrors coming at us is a situation where we have no pope. Now remember, the church was without a pope for quite a number of years in the Great Schism. And there were 3 claimants to pope, but nobody knew who the proper pope was. There was one pope turned 2 claimants. They were called 3 claimants. And finally they had to call a council of the church and dismiss all 3 and elect a 4th man, which they did in 1417. But during that time the church flourished. There were saints on both sides, but there was no visibly authenticated papal claimant. So, you know, if we are to go through that, if that's what Satan's plan is, and if that's what God is going to permit, we have to go through it. But we will always have enough light to know what not to do, and to wait until we get light. That's the difficulty.
Now, I think a difficulty that actually has occurred is that in some cases we don't have a pope in the sense that the pope can govern.
We haven't. Not at the present moment, we haven't got a pope who governs. He doesn't govern. He doesn't govern.
Now, have the popes, since the Second Vatican Council, partly brought that situation on themselves?
Oh yes, they have. Except John Paul I. He was only 34 days pope. He hadn't got a chance. He died. He was found dead in bed anyway. No, Paul VI brought it on himself. By the way, it was also brought on by John the 23rd. John the 23rd opened the breach, because he has a famous passage in his opening statement to the council on October 11, 1962. The church, up to this, has used sanctions. But the church is a good mother. And now it believes that it is sufficient to explain the truth to somebody for him to accept it. Out the window went all sanctions, canonical penances, and punishments for heresy. Nobody's ever condemned for heresy ever again. Ever. They will say, well, he's not Catholic, he can't be teaching Catholic theology, but nobody would ever point out that Hans Kung, Richard McBride, Charlie Curran are heretics. The church doesn't do that any longer. And John the 23rd started that. Paul VI prolonged it. And Paul VI prolonged it further by his laissez-faire attitude to the abuses of the church. I remember when somebody went to Paul VI in 1965 and said, Holy Father, we'd like to see the form of the new Mass that Annibale Bugnini has suggested. He said, but there are 18 new canons already in France. They're already going crazy. And all he had to do was give a strict order that they were all out of the church. He didn't. He let it go on. He let it go on and on and on. And John Paul II, when he came in, found the church was in shambles. And it was out of his control completely. Even if he were to forbid it, they'd do it. That's what they do today. He forbade altar girls, they did it, and said, Holy Father, it's our habit. He forbade communion in the hand. They went on and did it, and then said, Holy Father, it's the custom. So he let them go with it. Now, supposing they turn around and ordain women, or they marry priests. He knows we have married priests in this country operating in, say, the Diocese of Seattle under Archbishop Hunthausen. He hasn't done anything about it. So is this the way it's going to go? John Paul II is doing that for one reason and one reason only. He wants to hold on until Our Lady comes. He has said he can't reform the church. Nobody can. The church is irreformable until she comes and cleans it up. Now, one can talk about that. One can critique him for that. But at least it's an attitude. He's not simply laissez-faire because he doesn't care. He cares. He cares. He cares very deeply. But he's made up his mind that he can do something by holding some unity together until Our Lady comes and clears the whole situation up. It's a choice. Many of us disagree with it. Many of us feel distressed. The abuses continue. The Mass continues to deteriorate. Parishes continue to disappear. Bishops, heretical bishops and pagan bishops are beginning to multiply, and nuns are disappearing, and catechism is no longer being taught, and disobedience is flaunted as daring and as initiative and creative interest. He does nothing about all that. He could, but he won't. He's made a choice that way, and he is our Pope. That doesn't mean you've got to support it. It means you have to wait and wait and wait, and not disown him, because if we have no Pope party, we're orphans. Where do we go? Where's our home? We haven't got any home. So we're stuck with John Paul II. And by the way, he's not a bad thing to be stuck with, but it is very distressing.
Now suppose that you and I don't agree with some of the things that John the 23rd or Paul VI or the present Pope John Paul II is doing. Many Catholics feel that he should be taking a stronger stand to crack down on the abuses in the Church.
That's right.
Is it possible for a Catholic to disagree or rebuke, even rebuke a Pope on this matter and still remain
A loyal Catholic.
a loyal Catholic?
Oh yes, oh yes. You see, the one thing you cannot do is refuse the authority of the Pope. Say you're no longer Pope. Just tell the Pope, I don't know, you're no longer Pope. You have no authority because you disagree with me. And I have the true faith. Many people have said that to popes and to this Pope. You cannot, secondly, you cannot show him disrespect. If you disagree with him and you critique him, you can't call him names. You can't disembowel him, as it were, with words. You can't cover him with obloquy. You must have respect. He is Pope. And he may be like Peter making a mistake. Peter made an awful mistake, and Paul resisted him to his face. So much so that Peter, in a later letter, you know he wrote about Paul? He said there are many hard things in Paul. He had come up against Paul. But Paul always acknowledged his primacy. He went to see Peter on big questions, and he needed Peter's approval and blessing. But that didn't mean he had to agree with Peter's mistakes. And Peter makes mistakes outside the scope of infallibility. So you can do that. There's a danger, of course, you know, familiarity breeds contempt. And if you get into the habit of saying the Pope has done a wrong thing, very fast you hear people saying he's done a stupid thing. And then from that goes that he's stupid. And of course then it gets irreverent. And you can't say that because, you know, there's an old saying in the Catholic Church, who strikes the Pope will die. And you can't attack the Pope, even if he's wrong in a prudential judgment, and excoriate him and vilify him, because he is the Lord's anointed. You don't touch him. You pray about it. If he has to be corrected, you do it as best you can, and we've all tried it. We've all gone to him with various corrections. Some of them he's accepted, some of them he hasn't. But that doesn't mean they say, well, if you don't agree with me, Holy Father, I'm going to leave this church. Yeah, come on. You don't do that. That's stupid, and it's anti-Catholic. So you can critique the Pope, and you can write about it. You can talk about it. You can state quite openly you think he's wrong in this judgment. You can argue with his men, argue with him if you can get to him. And that doesn't make you a less good Catholic. In fact, it may mean that you're a very loyal Catholic, that you're not afraid of currying favor, that you don't want to be known as an apple polisher, that you're very sincere. But there's a limit imposed by reverence and respect. And then the limits finally, you know, if the Pope says, I want everybody to do this, and I'm doing it for a good or a holy reason, unless there's a grave reason against it, you shouldn't do it. Unless there's a grave reason. Just because the Pope says it. Just like if your mother said, I want you to all have your knife on the left hand and your fork on the right hand at my table. She's your mother. Even though it may be a crazy order, or for some reason you can't understand, you still will obey her, because you owe her that reverence and respect. Now, let us remember one thing about all this, that between the Pope and God, there is nobody else. He is directly confronted with Christ. You and I always have a superior. He has the abyss of divinity in front of him. He's directly responsible. He has no superior he can go to or consult. He's the final word. He is it. Now, whatever we disagree with him in, whatever we object to in him, remember that always keep your eye on Christ.
Thank you, Father, for participating in these interviews.
Thank you for the honor, Bernard, and see you soon again.
I am to introduce our speaker tonight, Father Malachi Martin, who will speak on the topic of global conflict of life and anti-life forces. So a little bit of background on our Father Malachi Martin. He's an eminent theologian, scripture scholar, expert on the Catholic Church, former Jesuit, and professor at the Vatican's Pontifical Institute. He is the author of many bestsellers, such as The Jesuits, The Vatican, The Final Conclave, and Hostage to the Devil. He has been described as a Promethean talent, a weaver of spells with words, and the most fascinating writer in the religious field today. His most recent book, The Keys of This Blood, has been publicized as a book of stunning geopolitical revelations. a compelling array of daring blueprints for global power. And one of them is the portrait of our near future as individuals and citizens of the nations. On a more personal note, I might add that there's this difference between Father Malachi Martin and Father Marks. Father Marks should never forget to bring 300 copies of his book. And sign them gratuitously after something like this. But I understand that Father Fiore will take orders. Please welcome Father Malachi Martin.
Personally, I've always thought that when it comes to talking and discussing human affairs such as marriage, divorce, contraception, abortion, sure, we priests should put in our 2 cents worth as pastors, but the 98 cents in the dollar of understanding should be contributed by women. After all, they know more about it than any man will ever know. That evokes a response, Father Marks. Now, while I think that, I do think, I say that, I make that remark about women versus men because of my early experiences. I was back in my native village in Ireland, Ballylongford, 2 years ago, and there was a death there, and there was a requiem mass celebrated by the parish priest, the Archdeacon Michael Culhane. He always pronounced it Culhane to give it a distinctive Italian touch. And he spoke with an Oxford accent because he'd taken his letters out in Oxford. But anyway, the death was of a very notable local called Thaddeus Maloney, otherwise known as Tady Maloney, the pig bar. And he had been married for 57 years. This is a very illustrative program, a story, and does illustrate the point of my whole talk. He had been 57 years married to Katie, and it was a long history of beatings and drunkenness, and she gave him 17 boys, children, and she earned her own living. She cooked for my daddy, who was the doctor and the local gynecologist. Anyway, he was found dead in a ditch. He had drowned himself coming home from a batter over the weekend, and the Archdeacon was celebrating a requiem mass the day I arrived, so I went to the mass and sat beside Katie, and the Archdeacon rolled on about the undisputed glories of connubial bliss and the private paradise of sponsal partners. And when we came out later, I turned to Katie and I said, Katie, now what did you think of the Archdeacon's talk? Well, she said, oh, Father Malachi, you know, he's a great priest, no doubt about it, he's a great man, but I wish to God I knew as little about marriage as the Archdeacon does. Which about sums it up. Sometimes it does apply. Now look here, most people here know much more than I will ever know about the struggle against this great death wish with this demonic energy that has seized the nations, because, my friends, it has seized the nations as a community. And therefore anything I say is said because it's second-hand. I have not been active as a human lifer. I wish I had been, but my superiors and God has given me other work to do. I've done my best. And therefore I feel a little childish in talking to you about it, except to comment on the whole situation and your labors and the almost impossible task we're facing, as Dr. Ernst pointed out in his expose, what we're up against. I have found, and my training has always taught me, that when you are facing an enemy, you examine the terrain very carefully and you assess the forces against you. You reckon up what you can do and what you can't do, what you may do and what you may not do. And in the light of that, of exact intelligence of what you're facing, you draw up your plans, because otherwise you waste time and energy. Now I do think that the basis of our view of this is, I'm sure you've all read that passage in the book of Deuteronomy where God says, look, this day there are two courses open to you, and I'm telling you which one to follow. On the one hand, you can choose life and goodness. On the other hand, you can choose death and evil. And then the text goes on to say, if you choose life, your bodies will be fruitful. If you choose death, then you will perish. And he ends up in the Bible saying, and therefore if you do not choose to obey me, and therefore do not choose life, I denounce you as of this day. This is the word of God. You shall certainly perish, and your days on this earth will not be prolonged. And I will call heaven and earth to witness against you, that indeed I did give you a choice of life over death, but that you did indeed refuse to obey me, choosing death over life. Now those are terrifying words, with which God, speaking from the vantage point of his eternity, describes in blunt terms our blood-stained guilt as a community of nations. Because in fact, systemically, and you all probably know that or have suspected it or guessed it, systemically our society of nations has opted for anti-life, for death, as an explicit principle of its socio-political organization and of what we call now progress. And God declares with almost brutal frankness why our present human community as it is, gathering together for a one world government for the new world order, is not only totally irreconcilable with his goodness and his holiness, but is professionally abominable to him and therefore totally rejected by him, cannot have his blessing or his luck, and cannot last in its present course. Now, they're terrifying words by our Father in heaven about our blood-stained guilt as a race, because we share it. Remember, there's a peculiar law of God. I mean, Adam and Eve sinned in the garden. I have a contention with Adam when I meet him. I didn't do anything. None of us did. And yet God has decreed we shared his death and his guilt. And we do share the blood-stained guilt of our contemporary community of nations, and when they are punished, we will be punished too. These are not the words of some baleful Odin, a Norse god, or of some frightful voodoo demon. These are the words of the Father in heaven, who creates little babies nestling in the womb of their mother, and who paints the skies and the earth and the sea with hues no artist has ever reproduced, has ever invented, and the one who sent his only son to be conceived, born, to live and to die and to rise the third day, so that we might die, so we might also die and be resurrected with him. On the lips of such a father, these words are terrifying. And I said deliberately blood-stained guilt, because overall and everywhere, throughout our community of nations today, numbering roughly about 5 billion, and chiefly by legalized abortion, but also by contraception, by euthanasia, by condoned infanticide, by deliberately fomented civil wars, by endemic hunger, by the floods of refugees, never before in the history of man, and in such a short span of time, has the life's blood of so many been shed so violently, so mercilessly wasted as in our day. We specialize in the death of masses as a community of nations today, and we belong to that community whether we like it or not. So anti-life, surely, that's us. We are anti-life. And blood-stained guilt, surely. Every 24 hours we widen that dark red pool of human blood. We do. We do. And lastly, I said deliberately our present society of nations, and it's on that I wish to concentrate with you tonight and reflect upon it. Because, my friends, we belong to them. And the punishments that God will send on that community of nations will hit us. Remember Jesus, when he was walking to Calvary, dripping blood, and the women of Jerusalem wept, and he said to them, look, don't weep for me. Weep for yourselves and your children. And then he added a funny phrase, but people don't comment upon. He said, if they do this in the green wood, what do you think they're going to do in the dry wood? If you ever have tried to kindle fires in the country with wood running with sap, you can't do it. You pick up some twigs that are dry. Well, my friends, we're both the green wood and the dry. And if they did that to my Lord Jesus, what do you think they're going to do to us? Both green wood and the dry. Now, the pathos and the tragedy of our position, And by the way, I'm not a lugubrious character or very sad or a pessimist. So these things I'm laying out to you, I thought I should do because we've been talking for these 3 days intensely about details. And I want you to see the wood for the trees, having gone through all the details. The pathos and the tragedy of our situation is only heightened by our own apparent helplessness. And that becomes more saddening and frustrating when we realize that literally millions, possibly billions of human beings, I sound like Carl Sagan, billions and billions, but possibly billions of human beings at the present moment love life, are pro-life. But all of us are caught. We're in a systemic community of nations which is anti-life, which has elected to be pro-death as a system, and we cannot get out of it. So we are caught up in the demonic energy of the great death wish. That is precisely the terrain on which we are working. And this includes our beloved America, unfortunately, where in the short space of, 18 years, 25 million have been done to cruel death by men and women, self-righteously and blandly claiming to belong to the order of healers, but who ruthlessly and cheerfully and efficiently spend their time tearing little human limbs, cracking crania like walnuts on Thanksgiving night, scavenging the remains for commodification. What a horrible thought. Commercial commodification of babies' bodies, and for export-import. And all this sophisticated skullduggery is sanctioned and condoned by two main blocks of people. First of all, our legislators, with the representatives of the people, who most unconscionably and for the sake of their own advancement have literally abused and prostituted the power that God the Father gave them. You would have no power over me, Jesus said to Pilate, this amoral coward, unless it were given to you from above. And then Jesus immediately added the second block of people involved in condoning and sanctioning. And he said, you would have no power unless it were given to you from above. Therefore, those who delivered you into into your power, have the greater sin. And these, we know them, my friends, we know them all. Uncomfortably, embarrassingly, bewilderingly, we know them all. It's a seemingly endless list of cultured, established, educated people. You know, our supremely wise men, our academicians, our sociologists, the leaders in both great major political parties, the party hacks and the ward healers, and the numerous gaggle of social commentators and trendsetters. By the way, respectable and respected people, trusted people, people who are in good standing in the community, well paid, well fed, well housed, well dressed people. All those who have made the slaughter of the innocents an integral element of our American life, of the politically correct and socially acceptable American person, the PCASAP, politically correct and socially acceptable person. Just remember to add to that list, by the way, you know the usual list of the politically correct and socially acceptable American person, you know, racial quotas, reverse discrimination, live-in buddies, same-sex parents, homosexual marriages, fetal experimentation. Add to that now abortion as an integral element to American life, as integral as the Bill of Rights in the minds of those who are pro-abortion. And let's be sure, in passing, by the way, amongst ourselves at least, to include in that establishment list the eminent and sometimes reverend mugwumps, with their sitting on the fence of opportunity with their mug, their rumps on one side facing their oath of office, to implement the solemn dogmatic doctrine of the church, and their faces peering anxiously on the other side, while they temporize with anodyne nothings and dialogue amicably and counsel patience wisely, because they will not keep their solemn oath for fear they might be called bigots and fanatics, for fear they might not be invited to the dinner salons of the great and take their place at the green top tables of power. My friends, how they yearn to be politically acceptable and socially correct. How they yearn. God bless them. to all of them from the immunity of God's eternity, the greatest innocent, Jesus, and all the slaughtered innocents say in unison, you made this lethal legislation possible. What a terrible accusation. You made our murder legal. You continue to make this abomination viable. The greater sin is yours. You are the authors of this abomination. You are collaborators and cooperators in the great death wish. They won't hear it until eternity. But imagine being swamped in front of the throne of Jesus at your particular judgment by oceans of babies claiming you killed us. You made it legal. God help them. And please, let me ask you en passant not to assume, because sometimes we do blithely assume that this great death wish aims at the death of the body, of millions of bodies. That too. But its purpose, in its authors, and its chief author, that liar and murderer from the beginning that Jesus contemned so much, Lucifer, the purpose is to ensure the death in the soul of mankind. The specific aim and ultimate, the specific and ultimate aim of all death dealing, including abortion and euthanasia and contraception, the abortifacients, the specific aim is to eliminate the Holy Trinity from our midst in the family of man by making fatherhood and motherhood just alternative lifestyles, by trivializing that God-founded troika of husband, wife, and child into just one more socially adjustable arrangement, by reducing sonhood to penis possession and daughterhood to vaginal freedom and married love to pleasurable mating habits, by in total effect thus eliminating the prototypes that God set up, the fatherhood of God in heaven, the sonhood of Jesus, the motherhood and the daughterhood of Mary, and the godliness of the Holy Family in Nazareth. That is the aim, not just the killing of bodies. And with that comes the death of the supernatural life of God in our midst. You know, I am come that you may have life and have it may abundantly, but you will not come to me that you may have life. One of Jesus' last pleas in John's Gospel. This is the real abomination. Now quickly add to America's abomination in this toll, add Europe's toll of the abomination, Soviet Union's toll of the abomination, China's toll of the abomination, India's toll of the abomination, Asia's and Africa's toll of the abomination, Australia's toll. What do you arrive at as a ballpark figure? I don't know. 500 million? 1 billion? It's not the number of zeros in those dreadful statistics that defy our minds. It's not that. It's much more the horrible fact, that the facts that paralyze our imaginations. And for the sake of our sanity, we cannot allow ourselves watch it, look at it, consider it. We ourselves can't. We can't see the crushed crania and the skewered limbs and the twisted entrails. We shove it all behind what the psychologists call the sensor bond, this automatic closeout method by which we can shove away a dreadful scene we've seen. It emerges in our nightmares, but in normal life we're free of it. In the context of our present rational discourse, though, we can look away from it. We can also neglect the insouciance of the establishment. And when you consider these statistics, you are sure of one thing, my friends, that this is systemic. It's not by accident. It's within the system by which we live, by which governments make decisions, both local and national and international. You're dealing with something which is not a passing whim, an irregularity in nature, an accident that's going to be corrected over time. You're dealing with something now within the system of our government. It is systemic. And you and I, we're born, we live, and die within that system. We're caught in it. I want to examine the system with you slightly. And if you know, all Irishmen, traditionally, since St. Patrick came to Ireland, suffer from mental diarrhea. So when it gets too much, I know Father Marx will look at me with that marvelous friendship look he has. You know, if you get up in the morning, I want to study our present system by which we're living and what we're facing, especially the younger people, not us poor whiteheads perhaps. If you get up in the morning and head out the door to work, and you find the front gate is gone, and your mailbox is gone, and the lamppost you used to walk by is gone. You say, well, who's taken away my front gate? Where's the mailbox? And where's the lamppost gone anyway? In other words, we are used to small things. We are creatures of localized habits. And we see it immediately. The moment anything is changed, where are my cufflinks? Where's that lamppost? What did they do with the mailbox? But the other characteristic of our character is that the other characteristic of our mode of living is that any vast change, any all-embracing change, not immediately affecting our localized habits, our home locale, our community, our job, our friends, our city, our state, our government even, any such sea change, we don't notice it until it becomes an accomplished fact. And then we say, oh, that's what it is. We don't notice it because it doesn't affect us and affect our localized habits. And with very few exceptions, we are creatures of localized habits. Now, the most jolting element about a sea change is that you're helpless when it comes. It's a fait accompli. It's done, and you have to live with it. Towards the final stamping of that new change, bit by bit, piece by piece, element by element, you begin to have a queasy feeling that there's something happening you don't know. You know there's something big affecting everybody, affecting us all. It's a vast, encompassing change. And then everybody says, well, this is the way it is now. This is going to be the way it's going to be. And then you're faced with that fait accompli. Sometimes it's not too jolting because you like what's happening. Sometimes you do like it. The most egregious example of sea change is the one that has affected my Roman Catholic Church. Now a community of 900 million souls nominally. In 25 years, it has been shattered. It was a pyramidal structure with the papal power at the apex, and everything ranged hierarchically between that, down to the smallest little parish, the smallest little person, with a flow of obedience, authority, and moral enlightenment and dogmatic statement coming from the top down, and with obedience and zeal coming from the base up. That has gone. We are now shattered in pieces. The unity is gone. But did you notice it when it was happening in 25 years? No. No, it just happened, and here we are. And it is a sea change. It's the most astounding sea change we have. And we still don't fully understand it. All we know is that that which gave us a Catholic community nationwide is gone. We now live in a completely different system. But about that perhaps later. It is a sea change. Now, if you understand, if you can appraise the change, the sea change that has affected this marvelous structure, I'm talking about the structure of the Roman Catholic Church, not the mystical body, not the spiritual entity of it. If you can appraise the sea change of that's taken place in our lifetime, we didn't notice it until it became a fact. And now every day we have examples of it, distressing examples, disunity. If you appraise that properly, then you can appraise the sea change that's taking place in our world. This sea change is societal. We unfortunately are the victims as well as the beneficiaries, but in this case the victims of our media. And the media are there to entertain, not to inform, in spite of all protests on part of the media. Because entertainment is the idea. Even the media people themselves will say, well, we're preparing a story for you tonight on the 11 o'clock news. It's a story. And we really haven't got what we really call a free press. It's always reflecting some point of view. Objectivity would be like a telegram or a computer readout. We don't get that in our newspapers or in our television. Now, the big change we have undergone without knowing it, and it is a fait accompli, my friends, is that, well, let's start with the machine or the mechanism or the Deus ex machina, which brought the change to our consciousness. He was and is a he's now 60-year-old ethnic Russian with a stain on his forehead, which the more religious among us took as the mark of Cain the moment we saw it, and dermatologists hastened to explain was the typical port wine stain of a vascular birthmark. Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev, who suddenly appeared. He had no political solutions. He had no financial solutions. He wanted to be financed. He didn't break up his armies, but he suddenly appeared in the West and touched us, and we will never be the same again. There was a magic there, a vast magic. And the magic touched everybody. Even Maggie Thatcher met this man and said, I sat down with this extraordinary man, and I assure you that every molecule of my body was affected by him. Maggie Thatcher. Gee, that's power. With the Iron Lady. And then we had Gorby throughout the world, pressing the flesh in Washington and Bonn, walking with the creased trousers, and Raisa, the Queen of Chic in San Francisco's Golden Sunlight, having tea with the Queen in Windsor at 4 o'clock, chatting with the Pope. And everybody's saying, oh gee, this is great. The bear is not a grizzly bear at all. It's a little teddy bear with dirty diapers, and it's hungry. It needs us. It needs us. It needs us. And but it went for more than that, my friends. It went for more than that, and this is where the fait accompli, the sea change, suddenly has dawned slowly on people. It is a matter of public record, and in the words of President George Herbert Walker Bush, Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev, Francois Mitterrand, he's so French, Francois, of France, Chancellor Kohl of Germany, Mikhail Gorbachev of Russia, Taifu of Japan, that their aim is to create a new structure for the world. And Mr. Baker, James the Faithful, has outlined this in words, which we read look it up in the papers. It's three concentric circles. The first circle is the Western European community, which is on its way, now that Maggie has departed. The second concentric circle is formed, and this is the big sea change, by the union of the Western Economic Community and the new Federation of Soviet States. And the third circle, concentric with the other two, is to run from Vladivostok on the China Sea, across the Russian heartland, across Eastern Europe, across Western Europe, across the Atlantic, and reaching as far as the beaches of California. That is the new economic union which will be set up. In the meanwhile, the organs are already set up, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the GATT, which is not the name of a cat, by the way, it's the General Agreement on Trades and Tariffs, which will create an omni-nation closed system of export-import, which we must join or die. All nations must trade today or die, will be established by the end of April or the end of September, but it's coming. And this has, the crowning part of this was that Mr. Bush, whom I respect an awful lot, of course, and Mikhail Sergeyevich, to whom I give the respect due to him, whatever that is, and the others, and Francois Mitterrand and Kohl, they have now declared the USA a European power. And there is a thing called the Council of Security and Cooperation in Europe, the CSC, which you may not know about, but it is assuming the governing functions of this new concentric, tricircle concentric structure. And the chosen president of that CSCE is going to be Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev. This is a matter of public record. Now, if you want to know is this fantasy or reality, just think about the Gulf. You know, we know 6,000 years of history very well. We know it in detail. We know what they ate 6,000 years ago. We know what the women put on as cosmetics. We know an awful lot. Never in that 6,000 years did the whole community of nations make one moral consensus. Never once. Until 1991. Saddam Hussein Tigriti, a butcher and a pig and a killer marched into Kuwait, thinking he had our say-so. He was wrong. And between that and January 16, midnight, all the nations except 3, and they don't matter a hoot, but including Red China and the USSR, agreed that we should stop him and we should fit an army out, a coalition force as they called it. This was a moral consensus. I'm not saying it's morally good or morally bad, but it was a moral consensus. It was the first time in history the community acted with a community of power. And indeed, we did get in, and we did root him out of Kuwait. What's going to happen in the rest, for the rest of it is something else. That was the first moral consensus. There are going to be other moral consensuses by the community, the international community. It is here, and it is being installed. The sea change is taking place. You can follow it very closely if you read between the lines, or read those that write about it who are insiders in it, but it is a fact. Now, the difficulty arises for us in our mission about human life. It's already hitting you in the face. This is being run on the demonic energy of the great death wish. And it's worse than that. It's more ominous than that. You know, in the history of man, the story of man, there are 2 major hinge moments. And you must reflect on them. The first hinge moment was in what is called the Garden of Eden, when this man and this woman, whom I have to meet someday and talk with about what they did to me, made a decision which affected the whole human race. And when the Bible presents them groveling in their guilt, there are 2 other people present besides Adam. You must blame Adam, you know, even though he said the woman gave you to eat. But with typical man grumbling, placing the blame on the little woman. But besides Adam, the author of my misery, there was Lucifer, represented as a serpent, but he was there. Ye shall be as gods. And there was a third person whom God referred to as the woman. And you will lie in wait for her heel. She was there. The second hinge moment was on an ugly knob of hill outside ancient Jerusalem at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, one Friday, 1957 years ago, as we calculate time, on which a man hung dying, trying to breathe, and ultimately at one given moment his lungs were so full of liquid he could give out one loud breath and he could never draw it back, and he was dead. In a few minutes he was a cadaver. He was dead. It was Jesus. And present at his death there was Lucifer. Christ himself, a week before his death, said, "You are the children of Lucifer and you want to kill me." With that clarity Jesus had. And there was Mary standing by the cross. And the decision Jesus made then affected the whole human race. A second hinge moment. Now, don't you see this as clearly as the nose in my face, or the nose in anybody's face for that matter? Don't you see that we are at a hinge moment? Why? Because once the nations have agreed that they will use the pro-death, anti-life method of governing, because they have to in their reckoning, that they are making a decision which affects the whole race of man. And without talking out of court, I wish we could publish the documents we already possess on the codified plans for dealing with African populations, dealing with Eastern European populations, dealing with China's population. These are not haphazard things. They are planned very carefully, backed by billions. But don't you see that this attitude is again man deciding about the fate of the human race? And if it's a hinge moment, truly a hinge moment, you're going to have that gentleman we always refer to in Ireland as Old Nick, or the old bastard. quite respectfully, by the way. We have great respect for the old bastard in Ireland. And there's Mary. It's a hinge moment, because they are deciding the fate of the human race. And once we get onto that plane, once we start dealing with the whole human race, we're dealing with the family of man. And as the family of man, we're the children of God. And God is directly implicated. It's no longer the French killing the German, or the Irish killing the British, or vice versa, or some colonial empire oppressing blacks, or yellows, or reds, or pinks, or blues. No. This is a case where men have made a decision that affects the very family of man, and God is implicated immediately, and so is Jesus, and so is Lucifer, and so is Mary. That's where you are, and that's what you're up against. And you're not fighting merely Planned Parenthood. No, you're fighting that liar and that murderer from the beginning, whom Jesus condemned so much. Because Lucifer aimed at taking away from my Lord Jesus the souls he died to save. Now, if that is so, then we have to find out, you have to examine carefully in your own mind why they're doing this. I mean, after all, you meet them and they're very well dressed, and the women are educated, and as I said, they're established, respected people. They're gentle with their dogs and their daughters and sons. You know, and they play golf, and they're respectable people in the community. They wouldn't hurt a fly, and they cringe at the idea of beating a child or a woman or a dog or anything like that. Especially a dog. You don't matter. Dog. And they have great mercy for the snail darter, you know, the snail darter. And there's a thing then called the blue-eyed falcon we've discovered in the Persian Gulf. Floods of tears have already come of the blue-eyed falcon. The darn thing is vicious. It bites your hand. One of the reporters got blood poisoning from it, but nevertheless it deserves great. You know, Saddam Hussein should not have dripped oil on that poor bird. He must be a bad man. Pardon the sardonic tone, but you know. Now, what is happening to the world? What is happening? Well, I'll tell you, my friends, it's very simple. You should realize this, and probably some of you know it better than I do. Every day there's a movement of capital, a flow of capital and capital investment and capital goods throughout the world. It's trade. Without trade, we'll die, or we kill each other. Who does that? What's behind it? What's the vehicle? The vehicle is the international markets. Tokyo, Singapore, Paris, New York, Rome, and the others. And on those markets, there are gentlemen, some women, but it's rather a male club, who play with a minimum of $40 to $60 billion a day on that market, on those markets. They decide if a government lives or dies. They decide on the flow of capital and investment and the creation of goods and their sales. They decide endemic hunger, they decide plenty, they decide recession, they decide depression, they decide prosperity. But it was all right until the end of the Second World War. Then the money men who wield financial hegemony, because this is the real hegemony, found out that they had to move from individual capitalism to the managerial system. So they did, but that didn't quite work. So they moved to then the multinational capitalism, and that rapidly transformed itself to transnational capitalism. It still didn't work. Why didn't it work? Well, you know, money. Money is a funny thing, and including funny money. And money, they found, wasn't making it. You see, the thing about money, it's extraordinary. Its fruitfulness is funny. There's no such thing as static money, by the way. It either multiplies and increases, or it decreases and disappears. Even with our little few shillings or dollars, you know that well. It must progress, it must have fruitfulness. They found it wasn't having that fruitfulness no matter what they did. And they found that before, when we went to war, because we want to make the other guy die first before he did it to us, we still ended up with the same difficulties. And because now we have international trade of a very intense kind, and every nation must trade, and there is a new developmental stage in human society, something else had to be done. The situation had to change. The answer is the human community, the creation of a one world government, Because it's very simple. We create the new omni-nation multi-trading party system. It must be supervised. Supervision means rules, governmental rules. It means that, therefore, there's a government over it all, which has already been blueprinted and drawn up, and we know the members of it. It won't be American, it won't be European, it will be transnational. And they hope to create a system of government. But in that, for that mentality, for this new community, there are two big blocks, and they both are being dealt with. The difficulty with the new system is this: they will have to deal with people's education. And this was achieved by George Shultz with the 1985 all-purpose agreement between the USA and the USSR. You should read it. It's cultural agreement, which implies that by a certain year, all high schoolers in Russia and here in China will be learning the same curricula in different languages. And a complete cultural exchange, because we seek homogeneity. But there are two great blocks to homogeneity in this community of nations. One is the Roman Catholic Church, or at least it was. It has been liquidated as regards any effective blockage of this, unfortunately. It has been infiltrated and the life sapped out of it. The second one was Islam. Islam, the arc of Islam runs from Algiers over to Indonesia, almost 1 billion people. Among them is rampant fundamental Muslimism. That has to be changed because they will not fit in, they're uncompromising. How best to do that than to have an arrangement whereby over 750,000 infidels, that's you and me by the way, are in their land, as they say, onward Christian soldiers, which did happen with the Gulf War, and we are now irredeemably and inexorably within the Middle East. And I suppose, I'm only speculating here, our chief ally there will cease to be Israel and will be Saudi Arabia, not necessarily with the House of Saud, and not necessarily with the House of El Sabah, who were short-lived, but with those countries. Because Islam must be effective. Without Islam, we cannot build this community. And therefore it must be permeated and changed. And the idea of the irredentist Islam, which keeps all infidels out of its land, its sacred land, that must be got rid of. Now, I said that we are linked inexorably with the USSR in this. Not so much with China for the present moment, it's in a developmental stage, but it's coming around. It's coming around, according to the calculations of the wise men. The wise men of the West and the Leninists are working on this. This is their aim. It's the only way their money can be fruitful. It's the only way they can avoid a war, even though Mr. Gorbachev has his SS-25s and SS-26s still directed at the United States and at Europe. But that's merely a matter of habit with the Russians.
To continue this presentation, please stop the tape at this point and turn the cassette over for the proper cueing of side 2.
The difficulty is that there's a third contender, there's a third member. The USA and the USSR are the contenders for hegemony, peaceful hegemony. As Mr. Gorbachev said in Helsinki, we are now peaceful competitors in the rush for global power in our community of nations. Mr. Gorbachev. Gorby. There is a third contender, and he's a lonely contender. He has no bombs, no armies, no planes. He has a certain portfolio. It's worth about $150 billion, I suppose. It's the Pope, Pope John Paul II. He's a Pole. He's 72 years old. He sits at the tiller of the bark of Peter, scanning the skies and watching the seas, and knowing that he can do nothing about it at all. He's a Pope at bay in his own house. He hasn't got the support of his Catholics. What does he rely upon? Well, he is relying upon, and he always points to the sky, on the advent of Our Lady, the Virgin, to come and change everything. And he predicts that it cannot go through. The plans for the new world community will collapse. But he predicts, as he always has, and insists, that the resolution of this And therefore the resolution of the main enemy we face as pro-lifers will be done before the millennium, before the year 2000. My friends, it isn't very far away. Thank God I'm 70. You know, it's selfish, but, you know, it's a thought. Pray for my soul. There is going to be definitely a rough period ahead of us. And in that, if we know that we're facing a systemic arrangement, that it's not simply separate groups, that there is a plan, it's not a conspiracy. The people just think like this. And they meet each other, and they intermarry, and they go to the same spas, and they go to bed together, and they eat together, and they play with the same money, and they have the same aims. So they want the same thing, and they want us dead, and they want all pro-life out of the question. They want to have a free hand with the human frame. That is what we're facing, and it's systemic. It's not single units. This is a plan we're up against, and anything we do is known to them, and we have to plan very carefully and find out what we can do and what we can't do. I would be unfair to you if I didn't tell you that if God acts as he has always acted, you know, the Bible says, the fathers ate sour grapes and the children's teeth are blunt. There is this God's terrible law. Okay, the father and the mother are both on drugs, and the father's got AIDS. The children suffer. Why didn't God save them? No, they're the children. Saddam Hussein is a butcher. He decided to take Kuwait. We went in and mopped up the place and flung him out. Who suffered chiefly? The Iraqis. God's law again. Why didn't he save the Iraqis from this one thug, this killer? He didn't. He has this funny law. And that's why we're involved. We will bear part of the punishment, even though we are innocent. And that's what Jesus said. Weep for yourselves and for your children. The present Pope, when he talks about this, will say that we can mitigate the sufferings ahead of us. We can't avert them, which is a frightening summation of the situation. Nor would I be fair to you if I didn't say to you one more thing apropos of this situation, and then I think mental diarrhea may be taking over. So I'll go back. I'll vacate this podium. God has a reaction we can't have. He loves us, and he does punish us, and will punish us, punish our generation and our children's children's generation. They will be punished. It always comes, because the abomination belongs to us as a race. We can mitigate it, but not avert it. But he does love us, and he is not going to let the human race, nor us, fall into the hands of our enemy, Lucifer. He's not going to give him that victory. Christ will conquer. But, you know, when you think about it seriously, see us as a hinge moment in history where God's family is affected. It isn't a local war or a minor thing. No. Somebody has tried to take his family away from him. When you think about that, then you realize that there's a father in the family, he's in heaven. There's a son and a brother, and it's Jesus. There's a mother. And if we really want to have a guiding light in all we do, then we have to think of her as the coordinator of this human family, the mother of the living, whether they're in the body or in the spirit. And only, according to the present Pope, and to anybody I respect who examines human history in its transcendental meaning, only when she, as the Bible says, comes for this age, you know, with the 12 stars crowning her, with the crescent moon beneath her feet, Islam, and with her son in her arms, who will rule the nations with a scepter. Only then will we be free, momentarily. Hallelujah. Now, Father Marx, one last remark is this. I had a marvelous thing composed in honor of Father Marx. I think if I read it, he would never even shake hands with me again. He's such a modest man. But my friends, he and I were discussing Wernfield von Straten. He's a marvelous man, whose works Father Marx will tell you about. There are 3 or 4 names today, how impoverished we are, of great men and great women who are the prophets of the time. They're the great people raised up by Jesus. Very few of them, but we have them. I don't think I'm exaggerating, and I will not repeat to you what I've composed in Father Marx's honor as a peroration, as an epilogue to these remarks. But I cannot get away from the feeling that because Marx went global, because he has a global effect, he has entered into this contention for the human family. And that, my friends, is a special charisma.